Make a few mentions. I want to thank previous members of the committee, which is Councillor Wells, who had been with us for several years, and he's gone on to another committee. Councillor Terry, who was also very helpful as well, and Councillor Pitt, who's gone on to the other overview and scrutiny panel, which means that I'm welcoming 3 new councillors, which is Councillor Taylor, to my right, she's a deputy. I'm Councillor Tevlin, welcome Claire, and Councillor McAdam. So welcome very much, and I hope you'll enjoy being on Overview and Scrutiny. Without further ado, we'll start the meeting, so apologies.
There are no apologies for tonight's meeting.
Oh, just one other thing. I think Councillor Catmer's online, so he'll be joining us online, so thank you for that. Minutes of the last meeting.
You have in your pack the minutes from the meeting from the 2nd of April and the 15th of May. If anyone has no objections, we can get them signed.
Please, if presenters and members can bring their microphone really close. Stupid me, I forgot to put my hearing aids in today because I haven't been to a meeting for a very long time, and I do struggle when the microphone's not close. Thank you.
So are we okay for the minutes? Any comments? Lovely, thank you. Okay. Item 2, members' interests. No? Okay, thank you. We will move on. Item 3, overview and scrutiny work programme.
You have in your pack a copy of the latest overview and scrutiny work programme. If anyone has any comments?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether I might just make a comment that when we last saw the work programme for this meeting, there were 4 items of pre-scrutiny on it and 1 scrutiny review which has been taken off, and tonight there are 7 substantive items on the agenda. I think I'd just like to make the point that I know that in the training and everything we talked about trying to spend more time going into items in more detail, but I struggled to read 360 pages and go into the required level of detail that I think members of the committee should. So I'd just like to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you. The point has been made as well. So I hope that we'll try and reduce the number of papers because it's fairly onerous. And we'll take that up. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Very much agree with what Councillor Jennings has just said. To add to that, it's also very disappointing to see items added on to the scrutiny programme at very short notice, with very little notice that they're going to be coming forward in the first place and being mentioned as key decisions. But one thing that, I'm disappointed that isn't on this plan, considering it's been mentioned on many occasions in council, is that there's nothing in here about the parking update. The parking update, as has been discussed at full council, would require a change to our fees and charges, and therefore, according to our framework for policy making around our finances, that should be on the programme as soon as it's discussed and is being considered, whether it's given a date for a meeting or not. So I'm very disappointed that that isn't on here, or we haven't been given a reason why that isn't coming forward, considering the amount of discussion that we have had about this, both in this chamber, in this meeting, but also at full council.
Happy to take that one away, Councillor Martin. As you know, there's been a commitment to undertake the car parking strategy and kick that work off. And I can say that officers are working on that, scoping of that exercise to procure that piece of work. So I'll take that away and feedback. and make sure it's on the long list of pending agenda items, if not the immediate work programme.
Thank you. I take very much the point about actually adding things on, and it will be following discussions with everyone on the panel when we put things on in the future. Item 4, outstanding responses to previous meeting.
So you'll see that there is a note of some of the answers raised at previous meetings.
Are there any comments, or are we, Councillor Martin?
Second meeting in a row, Chair. I'm going to mention that it's disappointing that we haven't had responses to some of the questions. There's been ample opportunity for answers to be provided to the committee. So to see another awaiting response from an officer is very disappointing.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that one up. It was a consequence of the timing of when the papers were published, but also the fact that that project, in terms of the installation of the screens, that information hasn't been able to be forthcoming because the screens actually haven't been installed fully yet across the whole programme. So there is a piece of ongoing work on it. So Pam and the Market Towns team are duly aware that a response is provided. So I'll make sure if we can get one out to this committee before the next meeting, we will do so. If not, we will feed it in as part of the formal papers.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mike. That's very useful. I wish that explanation was in the paper rather than just saying awaiting a response from an officer.
Fair point. Are there any other comments? Okay. Item 5, economic growth strategy. Welcome, Rebecca. It's your first meeting, isn't it? Welcome.
If I may, Chair. Evening, colleagues. Yes, I'm here with Rebecca Tomlin, our Economic Development Manager, who many of you will have met by now, I suspect, but our first outing as a duo in front of yourselves. And we're presenting the economic growth strategy. You'll be pleased to hear, hear, I'm sure, more from her than me this evening. But what's before you is very much a draft of our new economic development strategy, economic growth strategy. You'll see that we are planning to come to Cabinet with it not this month, but next month. That's to maximise opportunity for picking up any feedback from yourselves, and so that you don't feel unduly constrained to come up with particular wording by the end of this meeting for us to be able to incorporate it, so we can give a period of time after today, if that's helpful to feed in before we come back next month. That said, I am hopeful there's not going to be too much that is significantly new or any curveballs before us, because you have been enormously helpful in the earlier briefing meetings we've had around maximising input to this strategy from councillors, and thanks to those of you who've helped other stakeholders in your communities engage with our work on this as well. So this is a culmination of a significant piece of effort. The existing economic growth strategy is sort of COVID era is clearly in need of update. There's been an awful lot that's been going on in our local economy as well as wider society in that period, as the report picks up, and also it was due to expire this year anyway. The strategy document does have quite a lot of information in around the state of the current economy that's led. That is the basis of the strategy proposed. We're not proposing to give you a detailed presentation of that this evening. You'll be pleased to hear, given the length of your agenda especially, but if there is interest in unpicking more of that, perhaps through a separate briefing rather than a formal committee meeting, we are more than happy to do that. The team are very, very happy to share their insights and the work they're doing with councillors. With that, I will just turn to Rebecca to add a little further, and then we'll be open to your questions.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Perfect. Yeah, thanks for that. I think it was To add on to that, obviously we've gathered the evidence and the data that's provided to go into the document to enable us to understand what the actions are going to be for the economic development team over the next 2 to 5 years. So we have some tangible things to hold on to deliver in the short, medium and the longer term aspirations for that team. There's some obviously overarching themes of the strategy. So looking at the sustainability and balancing that economic growth, but making sure we prioritise where we need to spend our time as a team, making sure there's inclusive, so linking in with the inclusive economy and that pride in place, and linking that golden thread back through all of those corporate documents, and building that business community, encouraging residents to shop local, and kind of things from the inclusive economy. Education and skills and employment, so making sure that we're trying to retain our young residents in the district, making sure we job match and upskill, encourage people to volunteer, and matching that with the residents with our businesses, and then making sure that we position ourselves as a place for investments, and making sure that we are supporting businesses, and this is a place to invest, live and then visit at the weekends. So hopefully you'll soon be seeing a Discover Huntingdonshire website which showcases all the things that we can do in this district. And then making sure that we don't duplicate work, so making sure we work with partners and collaborate, so working with the Federation for Small Business, working with the chambers, with bids, and making sure that we work together are the key things. Thank you.
Open to the floor. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. Much appreciated. On page 54, I'm assuming it is a mistake where it's got 4% and 12% increase in floor space and industrial floor space. We talk about 2019 to 2014. I'm assuming that should be 2024. Because I think before we put this out to the public, we need to make sure that the actual document is correct. And then reading the document, I think it's very good, but I think we could have spent a little bit more time telling residents and existing businesses how we're going to help them, especially in the current economic crisis where we have been, local businesses have been hit with greater national insurance and business rates and everything else by this new government. How are we going to help those sort of businesses in Huntingdonshire that cannot afford to take on additional staff because of the increased costs that they've now been incurred by this particular government? So, we've got to start to look at how we can help them. And so, but I didn't see anything in this report as to how we are going to help our existing employers before anybody else. That is my main concern. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for that feedback. So this is very much a draft document. There are a lot of minor edits pending. I hope that we're across the ones Councillor Gardner has flagged, but very grateful for him doing so in case we're not, and we've made a note. I think on the final point, I mean, the sort of I suppose obvious thing to underline is that this is seeking to set a strategy as opposed to dictate that absolutely everything that the economic development team is doing. This is setting the strategic framework for that. So there's an extent to which it's focused at a higher level, albeit it's then unpacked with actions subsequently. On the tail end of the second point, Councillor Gardner, I suppose I'd just comment, of course, that in reality, you can't separate an individual, cost line and an element of challenge from an economy. Businesses are working in the economic context as a whole, and what this strategy is about is trying to maximise how good Huntingdonshire is as a place for them to do business, as well as for their customers to be here, for their staff to live here, and to provide the most conducive environment we can overall, recognising there have been a great number of challenges, both by government decision and by macroeconomic changes and developments over recent years, I think he'd agree, spanning different governments, and we're interested in making sure that Huntingdon's a good place to be, no matter which way the political winds might be blowing nationally.
Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just add my thanks for the report as well. It's tremendously positive and paints a really exciting picture for the region. I wanted to ask, so I think you've referred to a couple of websites. The report mentions the Invest in Huntingdonshire website, and I think you've also mentioned Discover Huntingdonshire, which I think is a tourism website. Clearly, we want to attract this investment and promote the economic growth of our region, but I'm wondering how we see the identity of Huntingdonshire evolving as local government reorganisation takes hold. Because I think the entity of Huntingdonshire is already somewhat meaningless to a lot of residents, and probably even more so to people further afield, and is going to be further diminished by the dissolution of HDC. It feels a bit like trying to promote the Woolworths brand after all the stores have been taken over by Poundland. So my question really is whether we're right to be continuing to promote and invest in the identity of Huntingdonshire, or whether we should be looking to instead to strengthen the identity of specific areas for investment, such as Alconbury, Ramsey, Huntingdon, St Neots, for example.
Councillor Pickering may wish to clarify whether he was calling Peterborough City Council or Cambridge City Council Poundland, but touch on that later. Now, there's obviously a wider structural context around local government that we're all well aware of, and this strategy is designed for now and to take us into that next existence, whatever that might be, because of course the district council might be no more in due course, but Huntingdonshire as an area that we represent isn't going anywhere, albeit it may be represented differently. And I think while our strategy is focused on our district as a whole, it's entirely designed to be entirely compatible with additional work in a more localised manner sitting underneath it as well. Rebecca may wish to add.
Thank you. Yeah. So obviously it will be a new website that we're launching in July, but we've always said that we want to be the best in class and be the leading way to promote the area. So we're hoping that with our websites that others look to us to think that's how we need to be, because actually there's not the surrounding areas are not being able to provide platforms like we are. So absolutely take your point, but we want to be seen as the driver of the districts to showcase what we've got in our area and why we're the best, and people should follow suit. Yeah.
And thank you. Just to clarify, there's no question at all that that we should be investing in our region. That's not what I'm questioning. It's more the specific identity of Huntingdonshire, which I think is already not particularly meaningless, so not particularly meaningful to a lot of people. So it's whether we should be, even beginning to invest in further in that as an identity, or whether we should be looking at some other identity, to represent the areas that we want to invest in. So that was the thrust of my question, really, rather than questioning whether we should be investing at all.
Good point. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a couple of questions, but I'll start off with a couple of comments, a question, then we'll spread it out a bit. First off, just touching on the point that Councillor Pickering raises, I disagree completely with that characterisation, and I think it does a disservice to the history of Huntingdonshire, which is, it is a historic county. As much as I accept that parts of Huntingdonshire may not identify with Huntingdonshire, there is a large swathe of the area that does, and we've got a very rich history which we should be taking advantage of. So I think calling ourselves Huntingdonshire and being proud about it is 100% the right thing to do. On the, I'm very impressed with Rebecca and Pam and the CLT and all the work that's been going on in economic development. I've seen it in my day job as well as in my role as a councillor, and they're doing a lot of work behind the scenes, which is doing is fantastic for the area and showing that Huntingdonshire is open for investment. We're open to grow. We're open to look at new opportunities, new sectors, new markets. And I think it's fantastic. And I think as a committee, we should all recognise that. And as a council, we should be thanking Rebecca and her team for all the work that they're doing to make sure that Huntingdonshire is on the map when it comes to investment in local areas. And I know talking to Mike beforehand, Huntingdonshire at UK Reef did fantastically well. And if it wasn't for the work that you're doing in your team, I don't think that we would be in the position that we are and being in the forefront of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough for investment. So to start off with, a big thank you and well done to you and your team. So I hope you can pass that back to everyone that's worked on it. My first question is in regards to, so within the framework, you say that you want our economy to be adaptable. Now, personally, adaptable isn't the word that I would use when I look at what I would want for Huntingdonshire, but I guess it could be just a difference in definition. So I'm wondering if you could just explain what you see adaptable as. So, that's the first question. What do you see an adaptable Huntingdonshire economy as being?
Thank you. So the adaptable was more about, we have identified with the data that actually we have quite a variety of key sectors and we don't have specific ones. So we have advanced manufacturing, we have life science, we have defence sector, and we've got a lot. So it's about being adaptable to making sure that we're supporting the right sectors that the data shows we need to focus on. It's including about LGR that we've spoke to and different changes in policy and what that might look like. So obviously we've had the levelling up and we're spending the last of the UK shared prosperity. There may be something that comes in after that we need to be adaptable to then pick up to make sure that we're right with where the funding might come from. It's about just being adaptable as within the ED team and looking at, the business rates discount then went, so we had to work with business rates to then work with those businesses to support them. So it's whatever is coming in at the time that my team can be flexible enough to change the way we need to make sure that we're supporting the businesses for what they need at that moment in time.
If I can just add to that as well, Councillor Martin, you'll see on page 6 of the strategy itself, it talks about our history is about an economy that's always been in transition. And I liken this to areas that I know fairly well. We haven't got a steelworks that is employing thousands and thousands of people. And that if you took that out, ultimately your whole economy is under threat immediately. Our main benefit is that adaptable, skilled workforce across a number of different sectors where there is that interchangeability. So advanced manufacturing now feeding defence, etc., digital feeding the cyber, which then also feeds defence. It's that sort of thing. Industries now are developing so quickly. We've only seen with the likes of Paragraph and the onset of graphene and things like that. That's where we are perfectly positioned. So I think when we use the term adaptable, we use it in a positive context, that we have got the staff, the resources, the place that can adapt to accommodate and to reflect the changing world that we currently live in, which is moving at a very quick rate. What we don't want this strategy to be is something that we adopt it today and in 3 months' time it's out of date because we have one massive macro or microeconomic shock. That's not where we want to be. And I think the data underpins that and our history as a district underpins that.
Thank you very much both for your explanation there, and I feel a lot more comfortable with the way that it's been used. And what I will just say, when I read adaptable, I thought we were talking about that we would have to make more substantial, comprehensive adjustments to the way we do things to be able to fit with the changes, rather than being flexible, which I would say, the word I was expecting was more flexibility, where we make minor changes that could open up a huge area for us. Where adaptable, I see it is just how you interpret the words. I accept that completely, and that's why I wanted the clarification. But I'm completely happy with the way that this has been used. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Cadmer.
much, Chair. Really building on those points about adaptability, I notice in it, and you would kind of expect this of me now, key risks is mentioned. And under that, it says that those will be managed, and let me get this right, mitigation, closely monitor the KPIs to maintain ongoing business engagement. But I don't know which KPIs they are, because most of our KPIs are not monitored closely. So it was just a thought, should we list the KPIs we would want to monitor? That was the thought I had.
So is the distinction between external reporting of key performance indicators versus what indicators are used internally and within the team?
It's just there is that phrase in there about KPIs, but what are they? What is the team monitoring? What does Rebecca and the team monitor?
Yep. Hi there. So I have KPIs. So we monitor the footfall for our 4 market towns as one of the KPIs. So any projects or actions that are done in our town centres and tourism, we can measure those via the footfall counters. And then I also monitor our business support. So that's done with tangible actions as well. So each month I put in how many businesses that our business support officer has worked with, how many people we're engaging with through our business newsletter, how many people have following our LinkedIn that are new people. So I collectively monitor those KPIs and then put them through each month.
It just might be useful to list them or indicate them, that's all.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Catmer. So we're kind of on that point. Some of that is crossed over with item 11 on the agenda, which I know we've discussed before in terms of the new corporate plan and the indicators that have been put in there. And very much the conversation that we've had is about managing the quantitative data that comes with economic development around things like engagement, but with also the qualitative stuff that will come through the narratives that sit alongside the corporate plan objectives. So those are the ones that would be regularly reported to the committee. But I think the key benefit of this strategy and the approach that we're also suggesting is you'll see at the back there are a load of other metrics that are set out quite clearly in a table that the consultants we've worked with and the team have identified as actually being things that we do need to keep an eye on, because they are indicators of what is going on and help us take the decisions that we are taking internally and the actions that the team will work on, but also that will set potentially future corporate plan actions and outcomes and future performance targets, but also, future actions that come from this action plan. So I think the reflection I would take of the existing strategy, which was written at a time and place, is it didn't have any of that thought about within it. And we want to get on the front foot of that to make sure that the decisions that we are taking as an ED team, as part of my directorate, are informed by the data, but they're also informed by what we understand is happening as well, and having that engagement so that we've got the ability to, deliver outcomes that are based upon informed decisions.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Catmer, are there any other comments, or are you happy with that?
It was just a general, and it's a niggle in my mind, that there's no in this discussion about, and I know it's not a 5-year horizon, it's more for a 15-year horizon, but we know out there flooding is going to increase, and we are going to sooner or later lose the northern half of Huntingdonshire to the sea. And I just felt there's no recognition of, and this is something I pick up in the news, that the national government doesn't recognise that this flooding is going to occur. And I don't know if there's something we want to reflect on that or not.
In terms of identification of a risk, is that what you're suggesting?
And it's a risk to the northern half of Huntingdonshire. Maybe not on the 5-year horizon, which we're talking about, but it's a long-term risk. We can expect to meet a sea level rise, which takes about half the land area of Huntingdonshire under sea, or at risk of flooding.
Thank you, Councillor Catmore. Again, it is something that we do take into account within other strategies, in particular the local plan. But I would also say that actually the vision that we've got within this document is about that element of resilience here. That, you know, there is going to have to be a period, to use the phrase, adaptation that happens over time as flooding and climate change impacts do occur. So the point is we will need to develop businesses, you know, if they're agri-tech businesses, for example, you know, agricultural use and land use is going to change as a result of that emerging threat in that northern part of the district. But it's how we work with them over a longer period of time to make sure they are resilient. Now, in terms of this strategy, those threats are probably long term relative to where we are now, but I think the vision that we've got there is something that actually should last more than 3 to 5 years, and is something that we should be able to take forward over that longer time horizon, working on that factor around resilience. So take the point that we may be not as overt about the flooding issue as such, but I think there is enough coverage there within the resilient approach that's set out in more detail in the document.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. I'm one of the newbies on this committee and still trying to get my head around it exactly. However, I just want to say I very much agree with Councillor Ross-Martin about Huntingdonshire. I think it's not just a district, it's a historic county, and we've got an awful lot of history to be proud of, and we can utilise that to actually bring more visitors in. You know, we need to get excited about it. But listening to Councillor Gardner, he says something which struck a chord with me is how do we achieve these aims and ambitions we've got here? Reading through, well, pretty much the whole document really, there's lots of sweeping aims and statements, and you know, which quite honestly I would expect pretty much any other district council to be saying the same kind of things. But when you look at what's happened with the government policy, I'm not going to quote anything in particular, but I think we're all well aware that there has been an increase in unemployment in the last 7 months over the country. There's also difficulties for new startups, people trying to run businesses, and even people that are running established businesses which are going broke. Now, what I'd like to see would have liked to see here, and maybe hope to see in the future when we have reports produced, and I'm not criticising the report in any way, it's absolutely brilliant. You know, this is my first sight of this kind of thing. But I would like to see a few kind of case studies and things so that we know. I'd like to get a much better feel and a grip on exactly how we as a council are helping businesses. It's not just we'd like to see the business prosper. I want to know how we are actually helping that business to prosper despite the difficulties that are going on at the moment. So that's really all I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you. So I suppose I'd signpost Councillor McAdam to the delivery priorities set out in the strategy, which has an element of summary of what we're currently doing with respect to the core ambitions, as well as some 2025 to 2030 actions outlined as well, which, as Mike referenced, you may be picking up in a different form later in the agenda. So I think there is a fair amount of specificity in this document, but as I referenced in original answer, I think to Councillor Gardner, of course, this is intended to be the strategic document as opposed to the sum total of business plans for the economic development team to follow over the years ahead. Because Councillor McAdam's absolutely right that. Just ambition for our area is not enough, is pointless in and of itself. But that's absolutely why we are doing more than that, and this strategy provides for more than that. And office has picked up the difficult bits of Councillor Martin's question, but the friendly bit he said at the beginning, everything he says is friendly, of course, and we appreciate that enormously, Councillor Martin. But the reference he made at the beginning to the enormously hard work by Rebecca and the team is absolutely right. They are all over, not just Huntingdonshire, but beyond, in seeking to sell our area and support the climate for businesses here already. Don't know if there's any specifics you want to flag, but hopefully that's helpful reassurance.
Thank you. Councillor McAdam, could you just press thank you? That's fine. Councillor Tevlin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the strategy report. It's very informative. What I'd like to see, you mentioned about there being a web page, or is it a web page or website? What would be really good to see, building on what Councillor McAdam also said, some case studies, for example, from the UK SPF funding, the Huntingdonshire Futures funding, something that makes it appealing to anyone potentially bidding for funding and making an application. Why should they make an application? What benefit will it do to their business in Huntingdonshire? And capitalising on the success already, I'd like to see that. That'd be really good. And also with that website, information very clearly laid out, because this is a very sort of comprehensive report, something that is easier for the customer to identify with, and Q&A, FAQs on that, so they can be signposted in the right way to bid for funding and apply for funding or whatever. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. As I guess the only member around the table whose ward was never actually in the historic county of Huntingdonshire, I'll make my point nevertheless. I think Councillor McAdam made a good point earlier about some of the wording being quite generic, and I just really want to pick up on the third theme of the strategy, where it talks about highlighting Huntingdonshire's unique advantages to access growth and talent. And then I looked through the document. I couldn't really actually work out what these unique advantages were. And the only references to uniqueness really just talked about our market towns, rural areas and natural assets. And I think there'd be many districts that claim to have market towns, rural areas and natural assets. So I wondered what you think these unique advantages to Huntingdonshire are, and whether they should be highlighted more in the strategy.
Thank you. There's obviously a balance in any document like this, as Councillor Jennings, I'm sure, will appreciate, that we could get into granular detail about what's precisely unique and different about our area, versus a level of pithier summary, and the document tries to do an element of both. But obviously lots of areas would claim positive things about where they are. I think one of the critical points that is relevant to the economic status of Huntingdonshire is its complements of transport routes as well, both north-south, east-west, roads, but with substantial national government investment of late in the South Bypass, ongoing developments as well as of course rail. We've got north-south currently, and east-west we hope in due course. So there's elements around the combinations of travel modes, where we are placed geographically in the country, in terms of the accessibility within a day's HGV ride, or a return ride from major ports in Felixstowe and so on, accessibility to the rest of the country. So we're in lots of ways a gateway as a place which is relevant to a number of areas of our current and potential future developing economy. And I think the elements around the adaptability that, as Mike flagged earlier, has been shown in the workforce in Huntingdonshire over recent years. There's a whole range of things on top of the fact that we're a wonderful place to be and to live, and for people to be here as well. Our natural assets, as Councillor Jennings flags, all of that, which I suspect he well knows. But I think his fair point about how clearly we're articulating that, lest it sound like a soundbite, I think is fair, and we'll make sure it's as without being excessively detailed, is as clear as possible about backing up the statement.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to sort of quote some of the narrative within the strategy, and then I will get onto my question / comment / recommendation. So the bits that I've picked out are mostly to do with our market towns and not the whole wider area. So our ambitions are vibrancy in our rural areas, and market towns make a district desirable place to spend time and explore. The experience of our market towns and the rest of the district, including rural industrial areas, it's very different. In non-market towns, there has been growth and business numbers, mostly few by areas in the north and east of the district and around successful new developments. In contrast, 3 of our 4 market towns, Huntingdon, St Neots, St Ives, there have been high declines in businesses. These are areas. In these areas, the high street and visitor economy offer retail, entertainment, hospitality business has stayed regularly stable, with decline driven by professional and office-based sector. I tend to disagree with that slightly. I have seen a lot of retail in our market towns, especially St Neots, just totally take a nosedive. I've worked in them. I've lost my job in them. Hospitality, it comes and it goes. So I do slightly disagree with that. One of the other comments within the strategy is the threats, which says market towns are impacted by our changing economy. Absolutely. What does success look like? We have a diverse offer on a high street for the whole community, and vacancy is low. So basically what you're saying is, what is that success? So we have a diverse offer, absolutely. We need to get retail back in. We need to get our shops so we can get back in there and buy and not keep buying from online. That is that diverse offer. We don't just want cafes. And the whole community, and obviously the vacancy is low. So this is my point. At no point has parking charges been spoken about in this strategy. Have we any evidence that cheaper car parking or no car parking charges will increase the desirability to spend time and explore in our market towns? What my recommendation is to Cabinet, if through you, Chair, if the panel accept my recommendation, is that included within the economic growth strategy, if there is a decrease or increase or even no charge for parking vehicles within the market towns in HGC car parks, how would each of those scenarios impact the economic growth of our towns, our market towns that have to pay the charges? This will then give us evidence-based way forward of how we would charge for parking. Thank you, Chair.
I think there were several questions in there. So whatever you can.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I start with the start of that for simplicity. There's obviously an evidence base that underpins the data that's being presented back here, but there's certainly no claim that it's a sole authority on reality, and there are different dimensions to how the trends in the economy are perceived, and so that the reference to stability, to relative stability in areas like hospitality, entertainment, and retail is emphasis on the word relative for reasons you flagged. Obviously, the economy has been enormously challenging over the last several years for a whole range of factors we don't need to rehearse. And our market towns have felt the brunt of that in lots of ways. So the picture that we've got and that the consultants have helped us pull together of our current economy is set out, and as I say, we can pick up kind of more detailed question about what is and isn't in that maybe offline if that's helpful, but we are satisfied that this is sort of a reasonable level of evidence and accuracy on which to base a strategic approach going forward. In terms of car parking, I suppose the sort of short answer is I think that's outside the scope of a strategic approach to how we're seeking to govern economic growth across the district, which is not to say that there aren't significant decisions to be taken around car park charging, which may or may not have impacts, which I won't purport to get into because that's not what we're speaking to the council about this evening. I could speak in more detail on that, but I suspect it's not overly helpful. This stands regardless of who runs what car parks and what they charge for them, because we've got the strategic ambition around our market towns being places that people want to come to spend time in, reflecting that diversity of economy that Councillor Taylor rightly flags that we certainly need in them.
Through yourself, Chair, without wishing to elongate the debate, I think, in terms of threats, it comes back to data versus perception. And if I draw members' attention to page 15 of the document, it is talking about there accommodation and food services, arts, entertainment, recreation and other services as some of our fastest growing areas for jobs and business sizes in the district, covering the area of COVID. Now, I think if you asked most people, they would say those are the areas that actually are in decline, and people would say the opposite perceptionally relative to what the data is showing. So we have to kind of take that balance. Now, we've done a piece of work here that is informed by data. It takes on board the local credentials, and there will always be differences of opinion about what people feel of their particular town and local areas. I would disagree on the point about relying solely on retail as being the impact of town centres. The whole point is that our town centres are I will vehemently defend the point that they are not dying. They are simply evolving and going through a period of change. We are seeing that with the big retailers changing their models, moving to a more leisure-based, time-based element of town centres. And I think coming on to the point about parking, this isn't the parking strategy. That, is ultimately a separate document that will be dealt with by the council. What I would say is that the document here gives some hooks that need to be considered when the council is developing that strategy, if this strategy is indeed adopted. And so taking that point about the vibrancy in our rural areas and market towns make our district a desirable place to spend time and explore. That if this document is adopted, that will be a driver that will influence decisions that are made about other strategies. As Councillor Taylor, you well know, in terms of parking, yes, we have sites that we offer and we can do what we want on parking, but there are other private car parks that we have no control over or no influence over as well. And I think we need to make our decisions about the car parking strategy as an organisation from an evidence-based position, and that is done through its own individual strategy to which the authority has made a commitment to do. So I think my point is the two strategies should be able to coexist, And there may be an influence of this strategy upon the parking strategy. And ultimately, there might be things that come out of the parking strategy and actions that, might test some of the thesis that is being suggested around, that if you made it free parking, that would increase the number of visitors to towns, etc. Because I think that is a debate that many places up and down the country have had, to say, actually, there's no real correlation between dwell time and use of town centres relative to providing free or cheap car parking. But again, every area is different, and we need to take our own council decisions on car parking in the light of the data that we know for our area. Thank you, Chair.
Can I come back?
Yeah, thank you. I'm still wanting to make this a recommendation to Cabinet. It entirely up to the panel. If they disagree with me, then that's fine, and we'll go for, if you're okay with that, Chair, we'll go for a vote. If they disagree with me, then I look forward to seeing this evidence base within the parking strategy.
Thank you. Clearly, I think there's some additional clarifications required on some aspects of the paper, which has been clearly demonstrated tonight by some of the questions. And I think that perhaps we need to just take some of those issues back and address those. Councillor Martin, did you have another question? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. I'll roll them in together. Both of them very different, unfortunately. So the first one comes from says 53 in the pack and page 13 of the strategy that's sent to us in regards to net migration based on age. It is very concerning to see that there is a significant negative net migration of 15 to 19-year-olds. Obviously the concern is that a brain drain of sorts, as it's called nationally. So just wondering why are we seeing this, and what do you see the impact that being in the future? Because obviously those 15 to 19-year-olds very quickly become 20 to 24-year-olds and very quickly become 30 to 35-year-olds, which will have an impact moving forwards. The second point is a bit of a scenario example. So one of the, under ambition 1, under the success, what does success look like? It mentions the environment impact on the economy is reduced and we are meeting our net zero targets. Now, currently in our economy, we have some very heavy energy industries. For example, we've got insulation, which is very energy rich, and the same with galvanizing, for example. In this strategy, are we saying, if, using the example that Mike gave earlier, we had the opportunity to have a blast furnace sited in Huntingdonshire, are we going to turn that down because of this strategy? Because it's not going to drive us towards net zero, because it's going to be kicking out a lot of carbon as a result of the process? Or, again, is this part of the adaptability where it would be nice if it would help us to get to net zero, but if it's going to improve our economy, we'd much rather have the high-skilled, high-paying jobs from a blast furnace, for example, just putting that situation across.
So on the first part of the question, I think I don't purport to speak to the full context, but I think there's an acknowledged cold spot in part of Huntingdonshire as well as elsewhere in Cambridgeshire around further education provision, principally in the southern part of our district. So certainly it's is unusually large in lacking a level of FE provision that you'd normally see for a town of its size. And there is a lot of work that we've been doing that has at least come up in passing, I think, previously on this committee around linking in, more widely with the combined authority around efforts to tackle that as well. It links into efforts around transport as well to enable people who live in Huntingdonshire to access training opportunities beyond on a sort of daily basis, for example, with improved public transport options rather than needing to move away for study. So there's sort of a range of particular challenges that are well known about and are concerning, and there is work ongoing to address. But I'd need to get back to Councillor Martin for a sort of fuller analysis of the figures. But he's absolutely right that if we lose young people who we can't keep here during their formative years, we're less likely to benefit from their contributions to our to the economy as they grow older and develop in their career. So they're a significant asset to our economy. On the second part of his question, I think we clearly recognise our economic, our climate strategy recognises as well as this strategy allows us to recognise that clearly climate impacts of carbon generation, for example, are macro. Something that happens here can have an emissions level, but it can nevertheless be contributing to reducing emissions across the board. So, for example, in sort of our heritage sector in manufacturing, there's elements of history in automotive here in Huntingdonshire, and there are a whole range of developments towards greening an industry that's inherently currently impacting on the environment, and we absolutely recognise that you can be making a positive contribution to climate even if you have a measure of emissions. So I don't want to comment on his specific proposal of a blast furnace here in Huntingdonshire, but perhaps he's got a location in mind. But hopefully that's reassuring that there is a holistic understanding of climate impact informing what we mean when we say we want to attract green businesses in the green economy to flourish here.
Thank you. Before Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you, Chair. It's an impressive first draft, but my question predominantly is, will this be a living document, i.e. regularly updated on our website? Because the measures are only being set on an annual basis, and the 3 that are immediately available to this council that are still listed with that frequency. As an example, yesterday I spoke to a lady from the CPCA who could immediately tell me the percentage of the young people classed as NEET. So my concern is that we have a lot of words, but anybody away from the district looking in could easily, based on this, be seeing data that might be 13 months out of date. So I think this really needs to be tightened, please. Yes, appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you for those. Yeah, I agree. I think the action plan, we believe, will be, I think that needs to be updated more regularly because the action plan might change as well from year to year. So I think it does need to be a living document. It will be on the Invest in Huntingdonshire website, and then my team will yearly make sure that we're updating the actions and making sure that the year ahead is looking what the action plan said. I also agree with I'm happy to take on board some of the figures that you've said to make sure that they're available on the Invest website as well. So we will be able to show you kind of our unemployment rates, our kind of SME numbers and how many births and death rates. And we'll make sure that the kind of highlighted key numbers are available on our website for anyone to look at when looking at the district.
If I may add, thank you, Rebecca, the work involved in doing a sort of full crunch of the evidence and the data to inform this is not without cost, and certainly isn't something that we're looking to do on a regular basis in commissioning particular research work. But but sort of distinct from the actions that Rebecca's highlighted. But as we've referenced before as well, the sort of key information relevant to our economy, if there are better ways of us sharing that to the extent that we're the best place to do so, we liaise with the combined authority as well in its publication, its data observatory it's now hosting, and its publication of data as well. There are potentially different ways of doing that, but it's certainly fair as a question, I think, about how we can make sure that we're publishing something that's useful. But I don't want to mislead members that we won't be kind of producing a new one of this every 6 months wholesale.
Thank you. We've had quite a detailed discussion on this document, and I think it's fair to say there are a few issues that have been raised by most of the people around the table. Least of all is Councillor Taylor. I mean, the relevancy, I'm sure, Rebecca, you will take on board, and I think it would be helpful if Councillor Taylor perhaps would take that offline and talk to you about the metrics for car parking, recognising that we have a complete strategy that will be coming forward in terms of parking. So I totally accept that, but I think it was just looking at the broader point. But thank you very much for the paper. Are there any other comments or questions before we move on? Thank you so much, and it's nice to see you. Thank you. I'd like to move on to item 6, discretionary fees.
My initial thoughts on this was I'm probably no different to anybody else. We could all put an application in, but with the day job, maybe take a bit of a lead on this. Happy for me to be in, or as I suppose, any one of us can put an application in, but I suppose the chances of me doing it are higher.
I think, Councillor Corney, it's for you to decide. Yes, there is a greater chance for you to put forward an application at some point, but I think the onus is on you to be able to stand back objectively and actually look at that without being clouded in your judgment and your view, and just remember which hat you're wearing this evening in respect of representing the council and your ward. If you feel comfortable that is the case, then I don't see there's a problem with you being involved in the debate this evening, particularly as we're talking about principles of the approach as set out in the paper, as opposed to specific numbers or specific sites or specific proposals.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy. I just felt right I brought it up. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's kind. Welcome.
Sorry, Chair. Are you registering an interest there, but remaining in? Are you registering an interest but remaining in the room? Yeah. Okay.
Welcome, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, members. You'll probably see my name is on the front of the agenda, and Councillor Mickelberg is in the report as the executive portfolio holder. So we're going to do a bit of a double act this evening, but I'll just briefly introduce the report, which, as you can see, is not just about planning and infrastructure, but also public protection. Clara's responsibilities also cover that, as well as planning, of course. So the corporate peer challenge and the planning services peer review both focus on the fact that, and recommendations were made that we focus on income generation. There's new legislation, the government's introducing a planning and infrastructure bill, and that requires all developers to deliver a 10% biodiversity net gain monitored over 30 years. That obviously will create a number of challenges and as well as costs for the council. And the proposal recommendation before you is option 1, which is to review and update discretionary fees in line with peer review recommendations. And just again running through the rest of the report, as you'll see at 2.4, income from planning applications is projected on an annual basis, but this obviously can vary due to national economic conditions, as well as the changes brought in by national government. As, excuse me, as I said earlier, this may change as the government looks to bring in a new planning and infrastructure bill, which will obviously allow local authorities to vary nationally set fees where they consider the national set fee does not meet their actual costs. So I'll happily deal along with Clara on planning questions, but also we have Brett here who will answer on behalf of finance, and he's obviously, his portfolio is delegated along with Clara to deal with matters going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Just to amplify what my portfolio holder has set out, I think you'll all agree that planning services has been on a journey for the last few years. And most recently, we've undertaken the peer review, which has helped us craft how we should consider our service going forward to make sure that we have an agile and sustainable service to meet the needs of residents and businesses moving forward. I'm joined tonight on my right by a new face, and if I could introduce Greg Dewhurst, who is our Change Programme Lead for Planning Services and is leading the way on the implementation of the outcomes of the peer review. But just importantly, within the peer review, and I won't look to repeat what's in the report in terms of the recommendations, your colleagues who sit on DMC, and some of you in the room do sit on DMC, will have seen the peer review and had the opportunity to discuss it through those channels. But importantly, as per paragraph 2.1 of the report, the Local Government Act specifically allows local authorities to charge for discretionary services. The purpose of bringing a paper to you tonight is, in particular, biodiversity net gain is a new, I'll call it a new line in the budget. The background to biodiversity net gain has been discussed through appropriate channels with DMC, but for the avoidance of doubt, the Environment Act in 2021 introduced the requirement for sites to demonstrate a 10% uplift in biodiversity net gain. In 2024, that was formally put into the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 under Section 7, and we as a council now have a statutory duty to monitor biodiversity uplift across the district. But recognising that this is a new revenue stream and there will be costs attached to that as well, in consultation with the Section 151 officer, this will need to be adopted at full council in July. So by bringing it to you now, it presents the opportunity for us to have a healthy discussion. Hopefully I'll be able to answer all your questions. If not, I'll be able to take them away and discuss them with Cabinet. Importantly, though, it also presents the opportunity for me to look more broadly then around different themes across my service area, which is not limited to planning and also includes public protection, and start to lay some foundations too for how we look across services to become more agile and responsive. But importantly, that we end up when I say net zero, I mean from a cost perspective in this regard, to make sure that we can deliver the services our businesses need. So rather than the focus being on how we cut back service to live within a finance envelope, how do we make sure the finance envelope fits the service we need to deliver is the key theme for tonight. I'll pause there and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Open to the floor. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a quick question and then a follow-up afterwards, if you indulge me slightly. So looking at the political side of the table at the end, when was this decision, or when was this plan first discussed?
I can't give you an exact date, but we regularly discuss matters like this. I regularly discuss those matters with Clara.
Okay, so much like I raised at the start of the meeting, we have a framework within our constitution called the Budget and Policy Framework Procedure Rules. It quite clearly sets out in that what the process is that needs to be followed for decisions that is related to our budget. This has not followed those rules. 2.2.1 Part A says that the process by which the budget and policy framework should be developed is the Cabinet will publicise by included in a notice of executive decision or a publication of the Council's offices by other means, except examples on its website or in the local press, a timetable for making proposals to the Council for the adoption of any plan, strategy or budget that forms part of the budget and policy framework, and its arrangements for consultation after publication of these initial proposals. The chair of the relevant overview and scrutiny will also be notified. That hasn't happened. As soon as this was on the cards to be brought to us, we should have been notified that this was coming to us. So if this was discussed and was a proposal within the last 2 months, we should have been notified beforehand, because within our constitution it says that there should have been a meaningful consultation on this. Now, moving on to the proposal that's in front of us, I'm completely supportive of it. I'm massively supportive of us putting additional charges on the added work that we have to do as part of legislation. I've got no problem with the policy that is in front of us. I'm very, very annoyed that we're not following the processes that are set out within our constitution. It is very clear what we should be doing. This is a decision as part of our budget that would normally have been decided during the budget setting process. So we must follow the process rules that are in front of us. And then finally, Chairman, a recommendation that I would like to make is that we remove the automatic delegation for changing or setting the fees. I'm a very strong believer that it should be the council and the council only that sets fees and charges on our residents and those that participate in our area. It is not, in my view, for officers to set those charges. We set the charges when it comes to the budget every single year. I think that if we are going to be changing any charges, discretionary in particular, it should be a decision of full council on every occasion. It shouldn't be delegated. So that's a recommendation that I would like to put forward to Cabinet, that any changes to our discretionary fees must come through council and is not delegated to officers. Thank you, Chair.
Clara?
Thank you, Councillor Martin, and I'm happy to answer both those questions and perhaps offer some further thought for consideration. To your first point around the timeline for doing this, in terms of BNG, we have adopted a new system. We started that about 2 months ago. But what that did show us as well is we had an upturn in Section 106 agreements that need to be signed, meaning that we need to make the July full council, otherwise we're doing the work at our own cost. It's as simple as that. The purpose of bringing it forward in June is in the event you had other further thoughts or queries, it gave us the opportunity then to come back in July so that then we could have that full canter through to full council and ensure that members felt fully briefed going into full council. I apologise that it has happened in this way. The intention was that you would have a fair wind to have a look at this in advance of full council rather than leave it to July and then have, for want of a better phrase, one crack at the whip. To your second point around the recommendation, obviously, members, that is for you to debate tonight. One question I will ask for you to consider is agility in the decision-making process. And with that in mind, as you see within the report, there is reference to viability considerations. What sits behind this document, and it is there, and is how we've worked up the plans. We haven't plucked the figures, we've used PAS guidance, and we've also looked at what other councils have used as well. But my concern to some extent, and I need to levy it here, is the theme of viability. So as you know, we're doing the local plan at pace as well, side by side with this. And as part of that, we will need to do a viability assessment. And within that, and via LPAG, we'll be having conversations then around priorities, who will then advise council. The question I'd put to members to consider inside that as well is if we have viability recommendations that suggest we need to make changes at pace, is the timescale to bring something to full council, and how then we craft a delegation that doesn't have unintended consequences for perhaps other work streams. And I would ask the panel through you, Chair, to perhaps consider some of these tensions and how they might be managed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to come back on that, as far as I'm aware, looking at our scheme of delegations and decisions made at budget, if this is approved, this will be the only discretionary charge that could be changed outside of a full council meeting. Now, for me, that is a dangerous precedent to be setting, that we're allowing those to happen. Now, I completely accept that there needs to be agility, but this is the case with every other discretionary charge that this council currently has. So they don't have the agility because it should be a decision of all 52 members of this council to make those changes. That's my personal opinion. As you said, it's for council to decide at the end of the day. But as I said, my recommendation is that that is removed and it always be a decision of full council to charge our residents.
Can we get some clarification in terms of where we stand on this?
I mean, in terms of the notification point, I'll pick that up after the meeting. I think there's an element there that as we are going into the full council process, I think there is still an element that the notification can be appropriately served before we get to that.
There is a process where an item doesn't appear in the notice of key executive decisions, and we have followed that process. So there's a notice put up in the building, there's a notice on the website, and notice was given to the chair of the scrutiny panel. So that process has been followed. As soon as we knew, we did serve all those notices.
So I think on that point, Democratic Services have given the answer on that. I think in terms of Councillor Martin's point, Chair, the recommendations are before you. You've got a proposed recommendation from Councillor Martin. As you know, this panel can make recommendations to Cabinet that they can consider and either agree with or disagree with at the relevant point. So it's up to this panel if they want to put that forward as a recommendation to Council. Equally, between now and put that to Cabinet to then consider, and then it will go on to full council in due course, who will no doubt have another debate of the particular item. What I will say is what we've got to separate the whole budget process from variations in year to the budget. And that's why this is being brought forward to go through to full council to essentially add the additional budget lines that weren't known about at the time of the original budget being set for the year. And there is an element of acting agilely and being flexible, and actually how do we respond to the ability to introduce these new fees. As we say, there is a budget setting process that does within it have a setting of the fees and charges schedule that sets that for the whole year. And that is the ideal time that we would like all of our services to line those up, so we've got a really clear picture. But as we've seen, there is a new piece of legislation coming that will introduce a new process. And I think the suggestion here from officers is we would like to be in the position to be empowered in an appropriate framework to enable us to respond to that in the best interest of the council. And that is about balancing up the need to support development and growth. As Clara said, we've got a backlog of Section 106s that of themselves will delay development from happening, that we have to consider. And we've got the cost recovery side that we need to balance up, and changing legislation and all of those factors. If there are other suggestions to the recommendation that might make members more comfortable in that setting about how we consult with group leaders generally, or yourself as leader of the opposition, Councillor Martin, as part of that proposal before we make a change, I would like to think that as members, you'll consider that in the context of our corporate plan, which is about doing our core work well, which does include cost recovery and being agile and being able to respond to those situations. So yes, I take the point that there are fees and charges set by full council, and that's the only ability as it stands at this moment in time. That's not to say that that has to be the way forward forevermore. That's for members to decide. We're just simply putting forward an option to you. So to come back to the point, Chair, it's a recommendation that is for this panel to debate.
Can I, sorry.
Can I just clarify something? Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm just reading it, unless I don't know if I'm reading it wrong. So I'm looking at 3.41. It says further opportunities for charging service, blah, blah, blah. There's that paragraph there. Then it's options considered, 3.42. The following options are considered. Option 1, review approach to discretionary fees as outlined above. Option 2, do not change the council's existing fees. Then 3.43, the first option, review the approach, supports the delivery, efficiency, effective service, which does in turn support the council's priorities. The first option follows the planning peer review recommendations, it's therefore recommended to council. So am I missing something? Have I misread that report?
3.42, option 1, review the approach to discretionary fees as outlined.
Through yourself, Chair. So just to clarify, because of the nature of this report, it has to go on to full council. So it's here tonight as part of that process. So it's here for pre-scrutiny before it goes on to Cabinet. Cabinet will then take a decision whether they recommend it on to full council, and full council will then have the opportunity to debate it. So it's set out in that language as if to say it's recommended to council. So the option is ultimately recommended to council.
Sorry, Councillor Gordon.
No, we've just, thank you, Chair. We've now clarified that point, and I'm in agreement with Councillor Martin. I think it is full council that should determine the level of fees to be charged by this authority, not officers. So I'm in agreement with.
Okay. We seem to have a little conundrum here. Can I establish the implications of delay, Clara, on this? What are the implications on delay?
We have a number of Section 106s that we will have to sign. They're already on the anvil. They're prepared to wait until full council in July. If not, we'll have to sign them and monitor for 30 years at our cost. Also, too, we have a developer, as referred to in the report, we have a developers forum, agents and developers as well. It would be helpful to have a steer that we can bring into that space to help have the conversation around charging as well, bearing in mind that we're dealing with the development industry here and dealing with people who are proposing development. So recognising that the next full council after July isn't until September, there will be more that come through the system between July and September if we're not able to move forward on BNG. I should highlight that other costs within the report, such as PPAs, we already have those in the budget. They are just being surfaced for information to show that we're seeing an upturn in them. But very technically, the new line inside the budget line that would appear in August, that then we'll be able to do a proper budget bid for and wrap that up so then it moves through the system properly, will be the BNG monitoring fees.
Sorry, John, on a point of explanation, I think we're missing the point here. I said I'm happy, and my recommendation isn't to delay the decision on creating the new charges. What I'm saying is that the new charges should be set by full council, yes, not set by officers. So I'm not suggesting delaying past the July full council. I'm suggesting that any charges are set by all 52 members of this council, not by officers, in line with what we currently do and is our current process.
I have taken that into account. I was trying to establish what the ramifications were overall. So that's why I asked the second question. Councillor Jennings.
Very briefly, Chair. So I don't know whether I'm missing something here, but why can't the scale of charges be agreed at full council in July along with the policy?
Thank you. I would look to work that through. Some of the challenges, and I'll speak honestly, are the laws of unintended consequences, where one could end up spending more and somebody else gets a very good deal. So we have to then cross-reference this in many ways. So, for example, to make sure that householders, for example, aren't unduly penalised, where possibly larger scale developers get what we'll call a good deal. We will be working with finance too on cost recovery, and I already know what I pay for contractors as such. So as a minimum, I'll be using that as a rate to influence the rates that then we need to charge, again, to arrive at I'll call it a net zero cost position. We can work that up. We can look to bring something through. Part of the rationale was to have the conversation with the development industry as well, to have their input to bring back to you, the timing of which doesn't quite align with full council in July. But we'll take that away. We'll have a look. I have my portfolio holder. I have my shadow portfolio holder. Same for finance, and we can look at that over the coming weeks.
Clearly, I come back to my point that we've got the paper as presented that will be going on to Cabinet, and it's up to this panel to make a recommendation to Cabinet. I think one other solution I potentially would surface at this stage, if it would help, would be to limit the extent of that delegation for the current financial year that we're in only. That would enable us to move swiftly to bring that charge in, and then in line with budget setting for the following year and subsequent years, that would then be wrapped up as part of the general fees and charges work that gets done in sort of autumn time this year leading into the new budget. So that might be another slight twist on Councillor Martin's recommendation that might find a happier medium for members that would also work for officers. But I think, cutting to the point of Clara's point, there is still some more work that needs to be done on this to work out precisely what the figures are, bluntly, and the implementation measures. What we need to establish is the principle of putting a budget line in the budget that doesn't currently exist, that can only be done by full council. And so that's why we're trying to push this report through, to get this report to July so that we don't have the unintended consequences.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mike, for that. And on reflection, your suggestion works for me. If it is only just for this financial year, recognising the pace in which we need to move so that we don't have any negative impact in the very short term, but recognising that moving forward, we need to move back to the setting the fees in our budget or at full council. So I'm happy to amend my recommendation to the panel to be that the delegation will be given for this financial year only, in consultation with the executive member for planning, executive member for finance, and their shadow equivalents. So the four, so it'll be Councillor Sanderson, Councillor Mickelberg, Councillor Jennings, and Councillor Golson. That will be my recommendation to Cabinet.
So, oh, sorry, Tony.
So, Chair, taking that proposal is amended, I got the impression that Councillor Gardner was leaning towards seconding the original one. You're happy with that change?
I'm quite happy to second that, yes.
Okay, well, we've had the proposal, and I'm opening that for the comments from the floor. Are there any other comments? Are we happy with that recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy with what's written down on the paper, to be quite honest. I think sometimes you've got to put your trust in officers, and considering it's going to be something that they're going to break. It's not to make. Have I got that understanding right? It's not to make money. It's to make sure that you're covering your costs. So it's going to be what it is. It's not going to be something extortionate. It's to be covering officers' costs.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, yes, Councillor Taylor is correct. We'd be working very closely with the Section 151 officer who will make sure that we stay inside all appropriate fiscal rules. The intention is not to make a profit, but not to make a loss.
Councillor McAdam.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to go along with Councillor Martin's amended proposal. However, I do feel, as a matter of principle, that all charges which come from the council, whatever it is, should ultimately come through the councillors. Obviously, we must have our officers to give the recommendations and the rationale behind which, but the final decision, as a matter of the democratic process, has got to come through the councillors, because we are the people that have been elected for that purpose. Thank you.
Okay, Tony, did you want to say something?
Well, simply you've got a proposal that's been seconded, so go to a vote at some point.
Councillor Pickering.
Thank you. The report gave quite a wide range of figures, particularly for the biodiversity net gain charges. So And, I appreciate we've just been given an assurance that, we're not looking to raise revenue beyond covering costs. But particularly in light of the previous item over, the economic growth strategy, I'm just wondering whether there's a risk that large charges for the biodiversity net gain monitoring risks disincentivizing investment in the region. So I'm just wondering how we balance, the desire for clearly, rightly recovering those costs against the possibility of deterring investors, those who might want to invest in the region.
Thank you. And that is a good question and something we have been considering as well, which goes to the point I was raising earlier about viability when we do plan making as such as well, because we don't want to deter growth. Ultimately, we have a statutory obligation to monitor BNG, and anybody who is undertaking development there with their agents, whether developers or agents, will know that we need to do that. Ultimately, there is guidance out there. The Planning Advisory Service sets out how we should approach this, and that is how we run our model. We don't look to disincentivise growth at all, which is why we will be transparent on our costs. So while the government is clear on that you can do cost recovery, you do need to be transparent about it. So we will publish our costs as well on our website so people can see it. There will also be opportunities for people to talk to us too, because biodiversity is one element of development as such as well. When we look at the range of developer contributions that are required, and that when SIL is required, that will feature in the discussions with developers as well around what we can deliver on site. But we will be working very closely on that theme of not disenfranchising businesses, but we need to be transparent too about what our costs are. So, for example, in this financial year, I would anticipate an income in the region of about £150,000. It may be higher than that. But already I know for the costs I have inside that team, they're just under £100,000. Now, BNG monitoring will go beyond the current cohort of officers. So I may well need to outsource some work, particularly on planning applications, while they may do monitoring, for example. And I know that currently the average day rate for a contractor is in the region of £550. So we are working behind the scenes on this. We're working closely with the finance team on how we model this as well, but not to be cost prohibitive to residents at one end, businesses the other end. And you'll see in the report too, we've talked about opportunities where we may look to waive fees or have discretionary fees, again, in the knowledge that there will be community development, etc., that will come forward, affordable housing that we'll want to deliver. So I'm very happy to hear the thoughts of those who were involved in the delegation when a vote was taken, and we can look to craft that further. But I take your point about ensuring that we are not cost prohibitive for business. Thank you.
So we now have a proposal and we have a seconder. So we need a show of hands for the recommendation. Can I?
Sorry, Chair, could you just repeat that?
So as I understand it, it's the recommendations as in the report, but to remove the delegation for setting of fees after the first year, probably a better way of phrasing that. And after that, it's delegated to the officer after consultation with the relevant executive councillors and shadow executive councillors.
Did everyone hear that? Right, okay.
So, Chair, just to clarify for the whole of the committee, so it's the recommendation as printed, limiting it for 1 year for the current financial year, but with the extension of the consultation to include the both relevant executive councillors and their shadow counterparts. So that's the recommendation. It has a proposal and a seconder. We'll take that first and see where we end up.
So we've had the proposal, we've had this, it's been seconded. So can we have a show of hands, please, for that?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8.
8. Yep.
And against?
None against.
I abstain.
Thank you. And I'll abstain as well. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
It's okay. Sorted. Okay, so well, hopefully we've resolved that. Clara, have you got anything else you want to add? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. No, just to say thank you for your time and I look forward to engaging with you. Obviously, this paper is not limited to planning in terms of some other finance lines, but if we're happy that it's the same cohort that will look at the different themes within this paper, then I look forward to bringing something back through the budget cycle.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time. Thank you. Now we can move on to item 7, corporate performance report. Good evening, Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. Shall I begin? Okay, so this is the Q4 outturn report. And obviously you've sat with me through, this is the 4th of these this year. And as usual, as always with these reports, it's been up and down through the years as we faced various challenges, which is why I'm delighted to say at the end of Q4, 84% of our actions and 87% of our key projects are now on track. And for the first time this year, not a single action or project is currently marked as being significantly behind schedule. I think this is a reflection of the hard work, dedication and focus of our officers and teams across the council. I want to start off by saying a heartfelt thanks to everybody who has contributed to that success. There are a couple of highlights I wanted to call out, things which have been stuck in the mud for a few years. The first is civil parking enforcement, which had previously stalled, but now is beginning to get back on track. We've now signed an agreement with County Council, and there's progress on the ground with lines and signs, which is good. We've also taken steps to embedding social and environmental value into our procurement process, which has been on the list for as long as I've been here, I think. I think as internationally and nationally, councils and governments take a stronger view against environmentalism and inclusion. I'm very proud that this council is sticking by its guns and continuing to push these initiatives forward. Obviously, we're not complacent. We know there's important areas where we still need to do better. And when we look at the operational performance indicators, the measures that track our day-to-day performance, 63% are on track and green, 25% are amber with an acceptable range, and 12% are in the red. And these include things that really matter to our residents, like missed bin collections and fly tipping. So those are clearly causes for concern. And as usual, I wanted to highlight disability facility grants. These have moved out of the red into the amber. The working group has met and has set up a very long list of actions they want to do to try and fix this. And so it's a positive step forward, but looking at the numbers, it's still not good enough. It's something we still need to focus on. Thank you, Chair.
Often to the floor. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. It may come as no surprise that I just want to talk about PI21. And the reason it'll come as no surprise is because I've talked about it at the Q3 report, I talked about it at the Q2 report, I talked about it at the Q1 report. And, you know, some people think I'm funny who have my little pad here, but I can go back and see exactly what I said at those meetings, exactly the answers that were given. And I just don't understand what the purpose of bringing the corporate report to scrutiny and getting asked questions about how we are looking at performance indicators that are in the red and being consistently told that, you know, it's just a blip. It's going to definitely come back. That's what we told in Q1. This is the missed bins collection, by the way. You know, in Q1 it was only slightly out. It was definitely going to come back. In Q2, we were told that the operations team were confident that the target was going to be met and that strict targets have been put in place to assist this. But actually, what's happened is each quarter we've just got further and further away from the line. And what I don't understand is what the purpose of scrutiny is if, when we're highlighting stuff at Q1, that actually these actions aren't real actions that are going to make any difference to the way the direction of travel of it ending up by Q4. So I'd be really interested to hear what you think the scrutiny panel can add to looking at these performance indicators when clearly in this case, you know, it has been raised at Q1, it has been raised at Q2, it has been raised at Q3, and the answers that we were given then don't appear to have had any effect on the outcomes, the outcome of the performance indicator at the end of the year.
So I completely acknowledge and respect your point. I do think that this is a rare off year from a service which has always provided excellent performance, far above national average. We've had a difficult year, obviously, and perhaps this is the biggest, if only maybe the only negative outcome as a consequence of the garden waste subscription scheme, which we haven't really recovered from. There are other factors as well. I think Mr. Sloper could probably comment on some of them. But I think, you know, I absolutely acknowledge, I think the team feel the pressure. I feel the pressure. I'm sure the portfolio holder feels the pressure. And it's something we're going to look to fix next year. It's okay to make excuses saying it's garden waste subscriptions, but of course, next year we're going to be doing food waste collections as well. So there's going to be even more pressure on that service. So, and the point of having these is to put pressure on the officers and staff and members and portfolio holders to get these things fixed, as I certainly feel the pressure, as you can feel, with disability facility grants, which we still haven't fixed. Some of these problems are intractable, I think, and your scrutiny and the pressure you provide are very welcome, because I think we want to do better, but in this case we're not. Mr. Sloper, do you have anything to add?
So really, it's just to highlight that the service has got a very ambitious target. That is ahead of what the benchmark target would be through APSI. It is regularly benchmarked against APSI, and the service would rather be held account against that stretch target than make that target easier. They're maintaining that target, and that goes into next year as well. So I think the service would be the first to recognise that the performance isn't where they'd like it to be, but they'd rather retain that stretch target and have the challenge.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for your answers. And I don't think there's any shadow of a doubt that I think that, you know, overall, the service that we get from our bin collectors is fantastic. But it is the one, if you ask our residents, you know, what is the most noticeable thing that this council does, it's collect the bins. And so therefore it's the one thing, you know, that they are disproportionately worried about getting done, and when somebody's bin doesn't get collected, it's the end of their world, or not necessarily the end of the world, but it's super important to them in that week. Whereas in the grand scheme of things, you know, being told it's in the 0.07% of ones that aren't collected doesn't really matter, because if your bin hasn't been collected, it really matters to you. I think that the thing about it being a stretch target, I didn't quite understand, because clearly it was the target was set considerably higher than the previous 2 years' outcomes, which are on that graph. And we were told in Q1 and in Q2 that the green bin, or that the green bin collection charge had no material impact on, you know, it wasn't a factor in why the bins were being missed. And I think when I read the report here, it said that these bins were being missed across all three kinds of bins. So I don't, you know, it feels like a retrospective coming back and saying it's down to the garden waste collection service, when we were specifically told that it wasn't when we looked at the report in Q1 and Q2. Thank you.
I've nothing else to add, thank you, and I acknowledge all those points.
Okay, fair point. Are there any other sorry, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on, excuse me, 34, and it's the outcome, forward-thinking economy growth, and it's the activity type influence. So St Neots has successfully received 10 expressions of interest under the CPCA Skills Capital Grant funding. It's probably not something that you will be able to answer, Councillor Ferguson, but what I would like to understand as a panel, and something that maybe we can take forward, is what is it? What does it look like? And what involvement has the community had with this? So as a panel, I would like to sort of push on that one a little bit and understand that, what these expressions of interests are. Maybe officers can tell me today. I have got one more, but I'll say that after.
I can't answer that, not surprisingly. Normally I would pull in Councillor Wakeford, who's usually sat in the audience, but he's had to go home on babysitting duty, so I can't do that tonight. So maybe we could ask him to provide a written answer to that question, if that's okay.
Andrew, can you answer or not? Do you want
I think Mike Gildersleeves can respond to that from the director of the service. However, what I would say is we can always provide a briefing note with respect from the service if there's an interest from the panel. So it's quite common, isn't it, from these proceedings that particular things are identified that we might want a briefing note back to you as a panel. So if that's desired, we can do that.
Yep, but I'm happy with that, Chair. Just one more thing. So number 57, upgraded paths and cycleways, Riverside Park, St Neots, green, no movement, green. That's because it's finished. So can't understand why it's still on there. What I would like to see on there, though, is we've got planning permission. Half of it's done. Well, a quarter of it's done. The rest of it isn't. So what I would like to see is a performance related to the rest of the funding that we're hopefully going to get. So just feel like we're not progressing on it. I just want to know how the funding is. We should be able to see it on here as a panel, and any other, resident would like to see what the progression is. We've got full planning permission, no funding, half of it's done. Let's see what the other half's going to look like.
So to answer that, the reason why it's on the report is because it was one of our 24-25 objectives, and this is the last report for 24-25, and so you'd expect it to still be there and hopefully deleted next year. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I'm not particularly keen on reporting on efforts to raise funds for projects which haven't begun yet. That seems to be a dilution of what we're doing here, and also would open the door to lots and lots of schemes which we have to fund. And I'm not sure, I know this is of special concern to St Neots members, of which I am one, and Councillor Jennings is also one, and Councillor Pickering is also one. I think we're all interested in this, but I'm not sure that it's not for me to decide, but I don't think it would be a particularly useful use of our time here.
I was just going to echo what Councillor Ferguson said, that this is the Q4 point. The project, as far as we can deliver it, has been delivered. The council, as officers, we are still waiting on the outcome of funding opportunities. In terms of the future actions for the current 25 and 26, they're subject to a further report that is before you. And Councillor Taylor, you'll remember from discussions in your previous portfolio holder role as well about the opportunities to seek alternative funding or to seek council commitment to the project is through the budget setting process, which we'll be going into later in the year. So again, if it is something of importance to yourself and other colleagues, then that's something that needs to be discussed with the portfolio holder as we get into that status later in the year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I have already written about this for alternative funding, not just for St Neots, Riverside Paths, but Huntingdon as well. Huntingdon's slightly different because it hasn't got planning permission.
Thank you. I am Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. When I look at PL 18 on page 188, I note, if I'm reading this correctly, that we are about 9% reduction in the percentage of household waste recycled, reused, recycled and composted since this authority started to charge for green waste bin collections, which I think, is not a very good sign for this authority when we're supposed to be green. Then if you go further down on PL 20, we state that our year-to-date residual waste tonnage increased per household is 43.53 kilograms per household. When you multiply that by the number of bin collections, which I've taken as 5.6 million bin collections, which we've got in the report, so I'm assuming those figures are correct, then that accounts to me that we are now sending nearly 247,000 tonnes of additional waste to landfill. How is that a good position for this authority to be in, to be sending that additional amount of waste to landfill? That is what I do not understand, and I would like an explanation as to why we are now sending all this additional amount of waste to landfill and how we're going to get that reduced going forward. Thank you very much, Chair.
So it's a concern. It's a potential risk that we highlighted when we brought through the papers on the green bin subscription service. Another wrinkle, of course, is by introducing green bins, we've stopped being able to collect food waste through the green bins, and so some of that went to landfill. That's going to be resolved early in the new year, I hope, when we introduce the food waste collection service. I don't know if Mr. Slope has got any other information. I think there is a paper coming, isn't there? There's a paper coming to Cabinet. Is it going to come to ONS about some of these performance indicators, which might be more helpful? Sorry.
I wouldn't want to steal the thunder of the head of operations who's sitting just there. Yeah, an unfortunate consequence is that obviously waste is measured by weight, and food is a heavy material when it comes to weight, particularly when you look at recycling. So it has a disproportionate impact as when you look at recycling, because recycling is measured by weight rather than volume. So if you collect a lot of plastic versus collect a lot of food waste, it's a disproportionate impact, because that's just how recycling is calculated by waste. So yes, there has been a change, and I think you can see it in those two indicators because they relate to each other. It is a well-known fact that the optimum collection to minimise waste is to have separate food collection. That has been now mandated by government, and this council is at the vanguard of that, with partners in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and actually has transitional funding to enable that, including funding the equipment, which is not an insignificant cost, as you're aware, for the refuse freighters. So therefore, there is a balance to the cost of collection as well as the investment. So all of that is coming online in the year, and in May, I believe it's May, is the go live. Is it April? April is the go live for the food waste collection service from the household. So you will see a significant change in the recycling, and actually our recycling rates as a district will increase significantly, and that's been all modelled out, and the figures are there, and I think they've even been presented to Scrutiny, but I'm sure Andy will be bringing those in due course with that model coming forward.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. No, we spoke about this at the last time around PL 23. I think the look tells me you're probably expecting something. It's a bit of an odd one, really, isn't it? Because we're actually asking our operatives to do more, which they are doing, and then we're giving it a red, which is it's a sort of funny way of looking at it, isn't it? But yeah, just the question was, we look, and I'm on page 193 of the pack, and it just really stands out, doesn't it? October, November. What changed? What happened to sort of suddenly we're and I'm sort of sitting here thinking. I mean, obviously, I'm no longer a county councillor, but I'm sort of trying to think back to when I was. If you can, is this when something changed at the recycling centres? I don't know. Is there a correlation there somewhere? Is this something that you've looked at, or you might be able to answer?
So in terms of the red indicator, despite the fact that the team are working hard, this indicator emerged from that team who wanted us to track it, and they were, as long as I've been portfolio, they've been providing these numbers to me informally, and so they wanted to do this and want to be judging it. I think you have to recognise, I think they do an excellent job, and the ops team do an excellent job. So this team do an excellent job in investigating the fly tipping offences, and the ops team do a fantastic job in clearing them up. And actually, when you look at the numbers, there are a huge number of fly tipping, isn't it? It's a significant problem. And so So I think that might be a better question to ask the team, because they do investigate, or they try to investigate, every occurrence of fly tipping. And sometimes one of the reasons why fly tips are not cleaned up so quickly is because the team wants to go and investigate it. So they might have a better view than I do, but I think, it's definitely worth considering things like changes to our household recycling schemes. The green waste subscription scheme was also, identified as a potential risk, but doesn't seem to have been an issue here, but we need to carry on watching it. I think when we talk about later, if we ever get there tonight, we talk about the new targets. That team has got kind of a much broader set of targets than just fly tipping, because to reflect all the things they do. But if it would be a good opportunity at some stage, Chair, to invite the team in to come and describe what they do and how they investigate fly tipping, because I think it's really important and under recognised. So,
Neil.
Yeah, if I can just introduce Stefan Gosling, who's the team leader of the Insight team. He's actually just reminded me that the hours of opening at the household recycling centres was actually shifted and shortened at that time. And obviously they have the twilight closing, don't they? So that may have something to do with it. But we can go back to the service and see if there's a response and get it back to you, Councillor Corney, just as that extra piece of work.
Yes.
Yeah, that could well be the explanation. But then at the same time, we'd kind of expect that to swap back when it's, so, I don't know how, we can go back any further, or, we'll see what happens. But but please don't think, I know I said last time, do a great job. I know that, the stuff that we've reported over, in my ward, it's, the work's noticed there, well, quickly it's done. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, there you go. I shall see you again. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Okay. So we're on to our next item, which is a financial performance report. Highlight of the evening.
It has occurred to me that if I speak for too long, based on our timings so far, I will be drawing my pension. So I'm going to hand over to our subject matter experts so they can get going and we can move as quickly through this item as it suits the panel.
How modest.
Thank you for that, Councillor Mecklenburgh, and good evening. We're here this evening to bring you the finance performance report for the last year. And this is really to advise where we got to. A couple of things to point out, and Sharon will explain a bit more about some of the detail, is to say that between Q3 and Q4, the services actually managed to turn their budgets around in line with the forecast, which is absolutely a great achievement in terms of heads of service being able to do that, and demonstrates that there is a good grip across their budgets. That said, I would just point out that some of the terms that we've used in terms of areas of budget, like chief operating officer and the like, were how the budget was set for last financial year. You recall we did a restructure in February, so the new budgets were reflected in the new heads of service structure. So that's why that's there. And overall, taking account of the additions we made to the reserves at the year end, which is custom and practice and good accounting once you come up with a budget that actually generates you more income or underspends your expenditure. And those have been included in this as well. So I'd just like to ask Sharon to give you a little bit more detail around that, and recognise that some of what's gone on during the year has changed the way in which we presented some of the numbers, but Sharon will explain a little more about that.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Yes, so if we go down to the bottom line, the outturn for the year has ended up with a very small overspend of £56,000 against budget. This is actually different to the Q3 forecast by about £850,000. The reason for that difference, as we specified in the Q3 report, is that we would like to have taken some money into a reserve to cover costs associated with the local government reorganisation. I do recognise that in the Q3 report, we didn't actually specify a sum of money, but it was mentioned in the MTFS papers that were presented to Council in February. This brings the change, if we take that £1 million out, actually the change between Q3 and Q4 is actually only a worsening of £150,000, which is 0.6%. So big thanks need to go to service managers for managing their budgets, but also for providing accurate forecasts throughout the year. Where I've been before, you'll get wonderful forecasts right up to Q3, and then all of a sudden you're hammered in Q4. So it's really good that we're now in a position where service managers are providing reasonable forecasts. I did have a conversation yesterday with a member around this table. And it was pointed out, we haven't all of a sudden made a huge surplus of £4.2 million that we've put into reserves. Most of that contribution into reserves was actually within the Q3 forecast, but it was included within the actuals. The only additional contribution to reserves is this £1 million to the LGR. Everything else is pretty much in line with what we were forecasting in Q3. It's just a change in the way that we've reported it. So I wanted to reassure members that we haven't suddenly found all this money that we're then putting into reserves. I think that's all I need to say. Just opening it up for questions, really.
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Sharon, Suzanne and Oliver for making time yesterday to have a discussion with me about this before it came to tonight's meeting. I know with Suzanne being on holiday last week, I do appreciate on the first day back her making the time for me to have those conversations. I think for the members of the public watching at home, and thank you and well done if you are still watching at this stage of the meeting. I just want to point out, if we look at this as if we look at what's in front of us, it shows a 56,000 overspend. Well, in reality, if we compare this to the original budget without it being amended in year as it has been on a couple of occasions, we have done better by over £4 million. So just our residents need to think back at some of the tough decisions that were made over the last couple of years, where we were being told that our financial situation wasn't as good as it should be. Let's just be realistic. Compared to the budget that was set by all 52 councillors in the chamber, we have done over £4 million better off than we had planned. That is a lot of money, and just imagine how far or what we could have used that money for, and what decisions we may not have had to have made if we had known that, and if we had planned that as we did in our alternative budget, and as we have been mentioning for a while now. And just to break that down slightly, it's £3 million that have gone into reserves, including the £1 million that Sharon has announced. That has said today that was in the budget papers. I went back and had a look to do with LGR, but it's also 1.666 million that was reallocated in between Q1 and Q2 of this year for a number of different projects. So as I said, for those watching at home, listening at home, whether it's live or listening back to it at a later stage, the council is better off by £4 million based on the budget and which was set by this council. So when you were being told that we were struggling and the joint administration had to make very difficult decisions to keep the council balanced, just have a look at what's in front of us tonight. Thank you, Chair.
I won't comment.
I would just like to come back on that, Councillor Martin, 2 million pounds of that 4.2 million was included within the budget as contributions to the workforce strategy and contributions to the future financial stability of the council. The balance of that contribution from reserves is actually coming from interest receivable on prudent cash investments. So we have higher cash balances and the interest rates have remained high. This is what we would call a windfall. This is not something that we could have predicted. If we had not put in the interest, if we had been less prudent for our interest, then we would be getting hammered because the interest rates could have gone down. And then we would not be looking at a surplus or a contribution to reserves. We could be looking at a huge contribution from reserves to fund the difference.
Thank you for that. Councillor Moore?
To come back on that point, I looked back through the budget papers and it showed a net increase to reserves of £1 million. So I don't know where the 2 million has come from. But I was making the point of the 3 million additional reserves that we have, additions to reserves that we've made that we discussed yesterday, plus the 1.666 million reallocation in year. That's how I've come to the £4 million figure that's in front of us. But on the point of the windfall, how many years in a row can we call it a windfall? We've been calling it a windfall. Councillor Mickleborough has called it a windfall for the last 3 years since they took over. So how many years can we realistically call that a windfall? We have said in our alternative budget that we believe that our interest income is going to increase compared to what was put in the budget papers. I'm sure that we'll be proved right in that. Are we going to call it a windfall again next year, even though we know the chances are we are going to earn significantly more than what is currently budgeted?
And I'm sure if we all had a crystal ball, we would have won the lottery. We can't predict what the interest rates are going to do. I'm sure central government probably can, but they're not feeding that information down to us.
So, at fear of turning this into a political ping-pong game, I find it unbelievable that I am being lectured by a member of the party who gave us a Lives Trust budget that our administration has produced a really healthy budget that is enabling this council to do fantastic things for residents and has stopped us from slipping into some of the financial mess that we see on our doorsteps and around us. So no, I think most people in this room would like to go home at some point this evening, so I won't make that point, and I'll hand back to you, Chair.
We've got nothing else to do, obviously. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to talk about debtor days, if that's possible. I think in the table that's very useful, and we talked about it, I think, Q2, and about the debt that was over a year old. And I think we spoke then about commercial rents. I'm quite interested in the 165,000 that's showing as due over a year old from 3CS. I wonder if you could give us an update on what that relates to and what the likely recoverability of it is, please.
So that is money that is owed to us by Cambridge City Council for the 3C ICT services that we provided. I don't know whether or not it was last year or the year before. Our new CDIO is on the case and is leaning heavily to get that debt paid.
Okay. It's okay.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that answer, Sharon. Thank you. The other question I have really was just whether it was possible for somebody to put in layman's terms what one of the comments on variances was to do with a reduction in the minimum revenue provision, and wondered whether somebody would be able to explain to the panel, because I don't really understand what that is. So I'm guessing some of my colleagues around the table don't either. Whether it'd be possible just to put it in words of fewer syllables, what that actually means.
We have the expert.
Have you got any easier questions?
So that's basically it's a provision to repay debt. So it's a bit like if you were in the private sector, you'd calculate depreciation. So every asset that we buy, which is not funded, so say if we've got a refuse freighter, we haven't got any funding, so it's going to cost us 100,000, and we think the life of that's going to be 10 years. We divide the 100,000 across 10 years. So each year we're going to charge 10,000 to revenue. So that's what our minimum revenue provision is. So that will be made up of many assets, any asset that we've bought which hasn't been funded by an external grant. The idea of it is when we get to the end, so what you can imagine, you've got a lot of assets, they've all got different lives on. At the end, we get a total, and what that'll give us after 20 years, it'll give us enough money to repay the borrowing, although in actuality, we probably haven't really made that borrowing. But it's nominally, so it assumes that we've made the borrowing, and then we'd have the principal, we'd have enough money to repay the principal. But at the moment, we're under borrowed, so we're not actually really borrowing, but we still need to make that provision. So if you think of it as like a bit like depreciation, I should also add, I suppose, it's based on the previous year's capital programme. So if you've got an underspend in your capital programme, you're going to be underspent on the MRP probably. So the charge to 24.5 would have been as a result of an underspend in the 23.4 capital programme. That's as short as I can do it.
If I might just add to that, it's good practice to review it from time to time and recalibrate it, as Oliver's just described to you. It's not something we have a choice over. It's prescribed by the financial accounting regulations, or whatever the words are, whichever regulations we abide by, that we have to make that provision. So it's not a choice thing. It's prescribed that we have to do that, even if we've borrowed internally. But it's good practice to review it. And if we don't need to make as much provision, that allows more money for service provision. So again, I think it's always good practice to do an annual review.
Councillor Mickleborough.
I think it's probably worth adding for the non-finance person, this actually gets more complicated. If you've got £100 in revenue and you spend that on capital, even if it's come from your revenue reserves, you have to put MRP to pay back your revenue stream. So even if you've saved money up, put money aside, and then transferred that money to capital, even though it's your money and you put it in your savings pot, you still have to pay MRP back to your revenue budget. And it's one of the things that catches, and I notice it's caused some confusion with the commercial investment strategy and our SIL money. I know I've had a couple of comments from some councillors around that. In essence, when you go back to 2015, £10 million of revenue savings, as it were, was put into the commercial investment strategy, which is a sensible thing to do. But in doing so, you give yourself an MRP liability on that revenue money that you've turned to capital. This just gets hideously confusing, and from a non-finance point of view, just baffles people and doesn't make sense. It's not actual cash flow. You don't pay that money back to yourself, but you've got to show it on your revenue accounting. It's not a profit and loss, but it would be the equivalent in the commercial world of a profit and loss account, in the same way that you'd show depreciation on a profit and loss, even though you're not actually paying that money anywhere. So this is where it's the vagaries of local government and the difficulty when central government then pull a grant on you, because you just can't do anything about that. You're stuck with it, and you've got to make adjustments elsewhere as a result.
Thank you for that. I too struggled actually. Oh, Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, Chair. Okay. I just want to touch on the £750,000 that we put aside, and full council agreed with this for the it's the community health and wealth building, and I have noticed in the previous item reports in this agenda that there is a progress update at Q4. it may be too sort of granular for you to understand, but I think it would be very important, and I don't know whether it is, Chair, on our forward agenda, to understand what funding we have used on this strategy, and just understanding a little bit more about it, because we've got a very short paragraph in the previous report, and I noticed that obviously it's spoken about within this budget as well.
Through yourself, Chair, Councillor Taylor, that was a matter that was taken to the other scrutiny panel earlier this month. So it was discussed in detail there with the principals. And I think a full and frank discussion was had with a detailed presentation from Claudia Death and John Taylor, who are leading on the work. The next steps are to look towards moving towards a relatively small pilot scheme of grant arrangements on that. But equally, again, I'll just refer you back to the public video of that particular point and the papers for that meeting.
Chair, thank you for that. That's most interesting, and I will look that up. But would it be of some relevant to this panel that we get some sort of costing that is being spent on that, or is that within, or is it sensitive, or is it within the other panel?
It's principally within the remit of the other panel. Any financial changes get picked up through relevant monitoring and the updates as they come through to relevant members. But principally, it's a matter for the other panel, and that's based on the adopted terms of reference.
Are there any other questions on finance paper? Okay, lovely, thank you. We can swiftly move on to the Treasury Management.
Good evening. This is the Treasury Management Outturn report for 24-25. For the newer members, there's often a Treasury paper on the overview and scrutiny panel. In addition to that, there's a Treasury Management strategy which is approved by Council in February, and there are quarterly reports from Treasury as well. So this won't be the last time you see a Treasury report. I just wanted to bring out a few points. On the borrowing side, we haven't taken any more borrowing out, so the council has still got the same amount of borrowing as it had at the beginning of the year. The investments are still much the same as we've had before, so they're mainly in the DMO and money market funds, with some in banks, and we've still got the property fund, which we've got 4 million in. We're in an under-borrow position, which I mentioned a minute ago, so we're using our internal funds for funding our expenditure, which is why we haven't borrowed anything further this year. A lot of that is supported by the SIL reserves, so plus other cash items on the balance sheet. And I was looking at my table, and I realised this time I hadn't put in how much we have invested this year, and it's 913 million we've invested. So although we've ended up with 65 million at the end, that is a net figure. So we've had 913 going out and 848 coming back in. So that's sort of a quantum of what's happening. But like I say, most of it's going in the DMO at the moment, which is the government Treasury Deposit Fund. I'll leave it there.
I have to say, actually, I quite like the new format of the report. I particularly like the graphs. I thought they were really helpful in terms of you don't have to, I found personally, didn't have to plow through the figures. I actually quite like the graphs, particularly. I thought they were made it easier and a much easier read. Anyway, questions, Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. And as has been the case for the last couple of times this report has come to us, I read through it and it's all very self-explanatory and makes a lot of sense. And as I read along and write questions down, they tend to answer themselves later on in the reports. So the report is absolutely fantastic, Chair, and it's definitely worth recognising again. The question that I've asked every time so far this year is, what keeps you up at night? Looking forwards, what is it that you see on the horizon that could be causing an issue to this good financial situation that we're currently in? What is your concern and the risks that you think we should be aware of?
We've discussed a little bit about interest rates. The forecasts we get are often based on the Bank of England rate or general investment rates. And as I've said, we've got a lot of money with the DMO, which is we're not sure how the interest rates on that might work once they start dropping. There's if the government are borrowing, so the rate that we get at the DMO is based on their borrowing need, basically. So if their borrowing need disappears, maybe the economy gets a lot better, they don't need to borrow so much, so the rate will drop on that. It could also drop if there's a big problem, because people will invest their money in the DMO to put it somewhere safe. So we've got a double-edged sword there. Whatever, if it gets better or worse, it could be that rate drops. We haven't got any history for that, so that's why I'm always a bit pessimistic about what might happen with that rate. So we probably have got history, but you need to go back 20 years to find it. So yeah, what keeps me up at night is money not being repaid. So this is why we use the DMO, because there's a guarantee from the government that will repay it. And the money market funds, they're all AAA rated. So, they should repay if they're going to be the last things that don't repay, basically. So at the moment, our money's quite safe. But so I guess probably at the moment, nothing keeps me up at night, because I'm confident that it's going to happen. But if we start looking at other products, then that might be something that we need to take a bit more care about.
If I might just add to that, I echo what Oliver said. It is relatively prudent at the moment. Obviously, our treasury management strategy does look at other things, and we'll look at that again and bring it back through the process as we always do. I think the thing that keeps me awake is the unknown about unrest and potential, the impact that has on our economy, whether it drives inflation or interest rates, as we saw, when Ukraine and Russia war sadly broke out. And that's probably the one thing that keeps me awake at night, is the impact of something unexpected that we can't readily predict, and what that might do with the economy. So, that's an honest answer there, because that's one that we just, we may see the consequences of, and it particularly worries me around driving up cost and inflation, to be honest, which then has an impact on our ability to deliver within our budgets, which then means we've got less money to potentially invest. So that's the bit that keeps me awake.
Thank you, Suzanne. Are there any other questions? Councillor Mickleborough.
It's less of a question, it's more of a statement, Chair, just to let you know. So we had our quarterly meeting of the Treasury Management Committee, I'm forgetting, working group, but whatever our terminology is for that, I forget exactly now. And one of the things that we have been doing is reviewing the commercial investment strategy. So a draft of that was sent round to people who wanted to be involved, and we've received zero response to that, which was a little bit disappointing. Now, I don't know whether that's been lost in the emails or wherever it may be, but I just, well, okay, that's interesting. So if it hasn't been seen, that would be explain why nobody's responded to it. But I mean, it did surprise me that there were no responses. So that's good. If we get that feedback, what we'll do is we'll work out if it's got stuck in the email. So I looked at it and it had all of the CCs with it, and everybody else was within it. But if it hasn't reached people for whatever reason, I don't know if the system's filtered it or. Then we need to take that back, because I was going to encourage everybody who has been involved to respond. But if you haven't received it, let us go back and work out what's happened and send it out again, because it did surprise me, and we really want to move on with that. So we'll take that away.
I'm sure I hadn't, but I will double check my emails, because I would have responded to that, because I actually had a conversation.
Well, what we'll do then is we'll make sure it gets sent out again tomorrow.
Okay.
And everybody who was involved, yeah, please, absolutely. It's important that we move that forward, and when we get people's feedbacks on that. So yeah, we'll send that again tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you for that. Are there any other comments on Treasury? Okay. Well, thank you, Oliver. Okay. Thank you for that. We move on to our item 10, garden waste finance.
Thank you through you, Chair. This presentation outlines the first year of the garden waste subscription service, showcasing its smooth implementation, strong financial results and key impacts, with 65% uptake and a £2.5 million generated. This success was driven by a council-wide collaboration. Using data to shape the planning, the service launched without disruption, aligning with fit financial sustainability goals while embedding itself as a business as usual. The presentation details the data insights, performance metrics, and how it is being delivered beyond the first 12 months. Before I hand over to Andy, I would like to publicly commend the team for their professionalism, hard work, and attention to detail that has enabled the exceptional results we see in the paper. Andy, you dealt with the ONS and members' concerns such as fly tipping, large amounts of green waste ending up in the black bin. But by providing us with other councils' data and experience, your confidence has been proven well placed. You and your team have delivered yet another superb service.
It's been a really long night. It's not my intention to run through every single slide at this point. More than happy to go into questions after this, but I think some of the big takeaways from this, as we said, the garden waste subscription now is in its first 12 months of service. 65% of eligible properties subscribed to the service, and that was a total of 50,242 subscriptions in year one. That we exceeded our original estimate of income of 1.5 million, and now stands in year one was 2.5 million. Just to echo what Councillor Kerr said, it was a full council project, and I think we can't underestimate that. There was areas of the council which you think wouldn't be connected at all, and we went to some of those service areas, and because of the tight deadlines and to meet the expectations of the delivery, there was some real big asks of some of those service areas. Some of those relationships I'm still trying to mend now on a professional level. What I will say is that every single aspect and every single person throughout the whole organisation stepped up and delivered. I just need that to be acknowledged, because it is a large-scale project. It's a district-wide project, and the history books are absolutely littered with failed council implementation projects at this scale. What I will say is, was from day one. I don't really intend to run through every single slide. It was very, very seamless. There wasn't any major disruptions at all. There wasn't any catastrophes. There wasn't bins strewn across the street, which was some of the concerns. It kind of worked out the box from day one, which is excellent. When we look at some of the key impacts, residual waste did increase. It increased by 12%, but actually throughout the whole project, throughout the whole governance process, that did align with the expectation of around 10%. We did expect to see that go up. Garden waste tonnage decreased. However, we did still manage to capture 68% of the original tonnage at the curbside, which is good. The thing is with the subscription service, because people are paying for the service, they tend to put out only full bins. Where it was free, there was lots of people only putting like sort of half-filled bins out. As alluded to earlier, the recycling rate did drop. We expected that. All the data suggested when you implement this, and there was a lot of data, 65% of authorities at the time, if you remember, had already started delivering subscription services, some of them as long as 10 years. So we weren't particularly trailblazers in these projects. But we could expect the recycling rate to go down. It did. We expect to address that in the coming years, especially in 2026 with the implementation of the separate weekly food waste collections. There was large concerns around fly tipping. That remains steady and within seasonal variations, what you would expect. There was, again, no significant increase. And when we analysed the types of fly tips, it's predominantly commercial waste, and lots of it cannabis farm residue, actually, which is interesting. Other concerns around things such as residents burning garden waste and fires and turning, I think some members were concerned that would turn into 1950s London and pea supers and stuff. That has materialised. Again, the data suggested at the time that it wouldn't. The service is now obviously past its 12 months. We're now into business as usual operation. Subscriptions for the new service for 25-26 went live in December. Again, we've got over 50,000 subscriptions and again committed 2.5 million's worth of income. I'm more than happy to take any questions at this point. I'm sure you've got one or two.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll open the floor to questions. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. And before I do have a few questions. Before obviously making the point that still fundamentally I'm against charging for green waste services, but I'm very pragmatic to look at where we are now and let's discuss what's moving forward. As much as I disagree with the policy, I think it's important that we move forward on what we have in front of us. Doesn't mean that I now agree with the policy. I just want to make that crystal clear for the record. We have in front of us the financial impact. So it's on slide, they don't have slide numbers, it's page 317 of our pack. And it talks about the revenue cost versus income that's received and then the net position. Does the revenue cost include the implementation cost that we were all told about? Because that was quite a substantial figure that doesn't seem to be showing in what's here.
No, it doesn't include that. That's just standard revenue cost. And what I will say, we underspent about 400,000 on the actual implementation cost, the capital spend. And that was things like bin deliveries, bin collections, because a lot of that we had to do that in-house. So we collect the bins ourselves, where I think we put in the budget 250,000 to get a contractor in to do that work. So it was substantially cheaper. So actually it was, the implementation was about 400,000 cheaper than we originally forecast.
Thank you very much. So just to confirm, so it was, you had an underspend of £400,000 roughly on the implementation costs that were put forward to us. Perfect. Thank you very much. The second point is in regards to fly tipping. So we saw in the performance reports under item 7 on this agenda that there has been an increase in the number of fly tips reported. And I completely appreciate the point that you were making about what we're finding is predominantly commercial waste rather than green waste or garden waste. What impact or what assessment has been done on the impact of the busyness of our household recycling centres? Just from experience, I can drive down most days outside the Alconbury recycling centre and they're queuing around, down the main road. Could it be just the fact that residents are more likely to queue up to put their rubbish in the tips, and commercial people are more likely to say, actually, I'm not going to sit around because it's costing me money sitting around. I'm therefore going to throw, to fly tip. Has there been an assessment made on that?
Technically, it wouldn't be for HDC to make that assessment because we don't run the household recycling centres, but I do work very closely with Cambridge County Council colleagues when we look at that. What Cambridge County Council don't actually gather is footfall data. So it could, whether it's 1,000 residents turning up or one resident doing 1,000 trips. So they don't actually capture that data. What I will say, when we look at the figures of the amount of garden waste that went through the household recycling centres through the last 12 months, it increased by 788 tonnes. Now then, is that a direct correlation because of recharging? Was that a seasonal variation because it was just a very good growing season? Were people just turning up because I've got a sofa to get rid of, so I may as well get rid of garden waste at the same time? I couldn't really answer that. I really don't know. What I will say on those figures, what's really interesting, and I know Councillor Chapman alluded to it earlier on about the increase in the residual waste through the curbside collections. So when you look at the figures, and this is something that there's a lot of data around, and when we read into it initially about when you do significant changes to collections, there's often a percentage of waste that tends to disappear from the waste stream, right? So in 23-24, at the curbside, we collected 21,882 tonnes, so 22,000 tonnes of garden waste. In 24-25, once we start charging, we collected 15,000 tonnes. So your natural conclusion might be, okay, then you would expect that tonnage, that's nearly 7,000 tonnes of material, which we would normally collect year in, year out. You would expect that material to say, right, it's got to go somewhere. So is it going through the residual waste? Okay, then. Well, yeah, absolutely. 3,236 tonne did, because that increased. Well, that's not 7,000 tonnes. So where's the rest going? Well, 788 tonne went through the household recycling centre, so you think that would increase. So that still leaves 2,496 tonne unaccounted for. Just not in the waste stream anymore. It's not in fly tips because they haven't significantly increased. So it's not in ditches. Now you can draw conclusions, your own conclusions from that. We did support residents in over 400 home composting units. We did put lots of comms out so you could say, well, some of that waste has disappeared, where people are just changing their behaviours. Are they cutting the grass less? Are they just composting at home? A lot of research would need to be done on that to actually say, yes, that's exactly where it's gone. But in 23-24, we collected overall 52,977 tonnes, and that's through the household recycling centre, the curbside residual waste, and the curbside garden. And after we started charging, we collected 2,500 tonne less through across all those waste streams. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. And final question. Well, before the final question, I think it's worth reflecting again that your team do a fantastic job, and whether we agree with the policy or not is separate. It's a political, the political aspect. I think what you and your team do is fantastic, and I'm going to move on to the missed bins, but in the past you've done phenomenally well nationally. We were in the top 5% nationally of missed bins. So, you and your team do a fantastic job, and you're always looking to improve. And that shows in the KPIs that are put forward to us. But obviously, in this last year or last couple of years, we have seen an increase in missed bins. Obviously, you heard what was stated in the previous item, under item 7. This says that you've got 3,975 missed bins across all waste streams. Now, does that sit equally amongst all of the different waste streams, or are we seeing that there is a significant uplift in missed bins in the green waste subscription service, or is it something else completely? I'm just wanting to drill down a bit further in where in that waste stream and where is the issue of the missed bins that we haven't seen in the past.
So the majority of the missed bins at the start of the year were in the residual waste collections. It wasn't in the green bins at all. And that was mainly due to we lost 6 experienced full-time members of staff to long-term sickness. So that's a lot of experience that you need to plug. A lot of this job is around people's experience because bins are very unique to people and properties. And as I've mentioned before, Mr. Smith keeps his behind the hedge because he doesn't like the neighbours saying it. And so there's lots of little foibles around this, and that kind of knowledge and experience takes a long time to get a new person in and get them up to speed. What I will say in context, when I first started the council here, the corporate target was 75 missed bins per 100,000 collections, right? That was the original corporate target. And now we consistently came under that score, round about anywhere between 65 and 70 missed bins per 100,000 collections. So we always pushed and pushed and pushed. We then looked internally, just as a service, not because it was corporately set. And we said, right, let's see how can we really drill down into missed bins, and can we really push and push and push, and let's see where we can get that. So in 23-24, I've just got the APSI report through. When we looked at our missed bin figures, our final score for the year was 39.8 missed bins per 100,000 collections. Okay. When you look at our family group, the average was 72.48. So we were nearly half what the average of 16 comparative authorities were. Okay. And then just to keep that into context. Now, based on that, we go into a new year and we say, okay, then what's our new target figure going to be? Let's be ambitious. Let's push And not to use a bit of a cliche phrase, but let's push for the stars and see how far we can get that. Now, there's two things we can do here. We can either say, well, you've never heard it and you're never going to hear it, and we're going to look down on that and we're going to kind of hold you to account week in and week out, or we can change the target and make it something more reasonable and lose the ambition. And it's always a fine line to make sure that you keep the pressure on to be the best you can be, and just accept sometimes that there will be bumps in the road. That means that the performance that you aim for will not be the performance that you get, but you still keep the ambition, you still keep the hunger, you're not complacent and you're not content. And that's the position that we're in. And it's unfortunate that month in, month out, we see red. That's not the intention of the service. We're certainly not sitting back. We're not sitting on our laurels and thinking, yeah, everything's fine. We're putting lots and lots of people under lots and lots of pressure to try and let's see how far we can get. And it might be that we might need to adjust the target. What I will say, when you look at the investment in the service as a unit cost for the performance that we get, and again, we talk about residents, and bins is really important and money is really important. The average cost of the service in our family group out of 16 comparative authorities is £74.58. The highest being £131. HDC's unit cost is 36. So when you look at bang for your buck, how much money do we put in? What performance do we get? We're absolutely punching above our weight. And what I will say, even though it is unfortunate that the targets are not exactly green or amber or exactly where we want to be, is that we have performance figures in unit costs that numerous councils would give their right arm for. And we just shouldn't lose sight of that, I think. And it's really nice and really positive to hear some positive feedback from members that I can take back to the team, because they do work really hard.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Chair. And when we were discussing, at the start of this service, I think there was some suggestion that organic waste that ended up in the black bins could be recovered in some way. And I just wondered whether that has proved to be the case, or whether we've got any stats on, so whether the increase that we've seen in the black bins has literally just gone to landfill, or whether we've got any stats on what might have been recovered from that.
The simple answer is I don't have sight of exactly where the end destination for the material, purely because we're the collection authority, not the disposal authority. That's in the realms of Cambridge County Council. They've got a very complex PFI contract that they're trying to work through. There's lots of, if you remember, they've got an MBT plant which is sat idle for 2 years because of complications in the PFI contract. I know my colleagues at Cambridge are working absolutely tirelessly. It's a really complex PFI contract worth hundreds of millions of pounds. They're trying to desperately find the best disposal routes for residual waste. But again, what I will say, when we look at the figures, so post and pre subscription, we still seem to have this perception that food waste, organic waste, was going in the green bin when it was free. But when you look at the composition analysis, which is quite clear, 41% of the residual bin, even when it was free, was organic material, and 36% of the residual bin was food waste. So when you look at, now the perception is, well, we've taken that away, so all this material is now going in the residual bin. The majority of that material was going in the bin when it was free anyway, and we've got all the data to back that up. I mean, that isn't unique to us, but that's the reality behind it.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm not too proud to say when I got something wrong. And I think that when we sat in the pre situation of this, and my main concern was I thought that those budgeted take-up levels were too punchy, and I did quite a lot of research of other councils and what they'd done, and there were councils in the Eastern region that were getting 22-23% take-up rate in the first year, and I felt that was a huge risk to the number that was in the budget. So the fact that you can you've achieved 65%. I think is incredible. I say well done on that. And you know, those concerns I've had have been completely allayed. So I think that's I'd like to put that on record. However much my colleagues might not like me saying so. A quick question I have is that it looks from the figures in the report that 96.4% of households have effectively renewed by the end of April. Do you think that's on track, that the remainder are likely to come through later in the year?
It's a really difficult one to try and forecast. I mean, when we looked at in year one, even, I mean, some strange things that have come out is the number of people who subscribed for the same service 7 and 8 times for the same bin. I mean, that's quite unusual. People were subscribing for the service in November with only less than 2 weeks or 3 weeks to go for the next renewal. We're at, I think, just short of 51,000 subscriptions now, but we still have a steady stream of 300 or 400 subscriptions a week coming through. So it's difficult to see where the end position will be, and I would not be surprised if people again were still subscribing for the service in August, September, October times.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jennings has pinched my question, so it's fine. No, that's brilliant. That's answered. But what I would like to say is, you know, as part of the joint administration and portfolio holder for 3 years on this, it was a hard decision. As much as, you know, we do bang on about it, but it was the right decision. And these figures that you see here, net 24-25, 1.52 million. It for a non-statutory service. I'm sorry, but the figures say what now we can spend this frontline money on. You can't beat around the bush when it's a non-statutory service.
Thank you. Are there any other Councillor Gardner?
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, as you all well know, I don't support the charging for green bins, whether it's non-statutory or statutory for that matter. And I will, before I make my comment, I will state that I am a county councillor, and it just seems to me that this policy, all it is doing is shifting costs to another authority, which you would not be able to do once we have local government reorganisation, because this document states that 33.49% extra waste has gone to recycling centres. Therefore, that's additional charges to the county council that they've got to deal with. We've got additional, as I mentioned earlier, 247,000 tonnes going to recycling to landfill. That's additional costs to Cambridgeshire County Council. Now, has always been my main gripe with this whole programme is that this authority is moving its costs to another one, which I don't think we should be doing. And this report today proves that fact to me, unless you can show me otherwise. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for your rosy. Andrew.
Yeah, just to come back on some of the points that you've raised, and absolutely, really valid points. It's a strange thing about residual waste when we look at the figures, and we've got figures going back an absolute long time. So I looked at some figures back in 2015. So you're right. Last year we collected 32,000 tonnes of residual waste. 2015 we collected 30,000 tonnes of residual waste with 10,000 less properties. What happened in 2015? Why were some of the months heavier in residual waste than there were in 2024 when we implemented the garden waste subscription? I really couldn't answer that question. What I will say is, when we looked at the data, there's a very clear pattern. January is always heavier because you've got Christmas pickup. However, throughout the years and throughout the months, there is a very scattered pattern around the amount of waste that we collect residual waste on the curbside. And there doesn't seem to be any logical rhyme or reason 2024, you could see things like when we went live with the garden waste, Easter came early, 31st of March was Good Friday. So instantly the district's in 2 weeks holidays, and then we had a national football tournament after that. So that could, I think the point I'm trying to get at is there's lots of different things that influence how much waste is being produced. But 2015 was a very strange year. 10,000 less properties, virtually the same tonnage. And garden waste and food waste is free. So why is that?
Chair, can I just come back very quickly? Very quickly. That's fine what you're telling me there, but what you haven't told me, and that is how much in 2015 was then going to household recycling centres and additional costs, perhaps at that time, to the county council. You haven't told me how much waste was going to landfill. That is the comparison I need to see, and I don't see that in this report going forward. So it would be useful to see that in this report, so we had a direct comparison. I haven't got that in this report. Thank you very much, Chair.
So when you look at the PFI contract, there's fixed tonnages throughout the year on residual waste. What I will say from a Cambridge County Council report, the last one I read, last year there were 8,000 less tonnes of residual waste went through the PFI contract, which actually saved Cambridge County Council nearly £1 million. So when you look at the figures, I think it's all right looking at HDC in isolation, but Cambridge County Council is looking at 5 other authorities across their waste disposal. So the residual waste disposal cost was actually cheaper.
And if I may, just very quickly, Councillor Gardner, I understand wearing the dual hats, there is an interest on both sides of the fence, but in this committee meeting, it's representing, the role as HDC rather than information that relies on other colleagues across the county area. Clearly, as we move forward with local government reform, whatever structure is put in place, it's likely those arrangements will be simplified and picked up by one authority as collection and disposal authority. But ultimately, I come back to the point of this, that we're talking about a discretionary service that we're not duty bound to provide. And I think whatever authority comes next is likely to be looking at a cost recovery model, because that's certainly the way government's ambition is to be, looking at financial sustainability. So, that will be hopefully a simpler arrangement for you to see the kind of correlation that you're seeing of, is there cost being transferred to one to the other? There may not be. There's data that we have, which Andy's given you the answers to, and there's data that colleagues at the county hold. But I just come back to the point, we're here dealing with HDC's role in the overall piece. If there are questions for the county, then please do take those to colleagues, and I'm sure Andy will relay them to his counterparts.
Thank you. Councillor Catmere, have you got your hand up for a question? No, okay, sorry, wasn't sure. Thank you for that. Any other questions before we move on to the final item? Thank you very much, Andrew. That's great. Final item tonight is the corporate plan.
Thank you, Chair. So in this item, we're bringing back to you our new KPI targets for the next financial year. In previous years, we've set those in September alongside the Q1 report, which is probably a bit late. We brought them to you in April, very early, as part of the corporate plan refresh, to give you a chance to comment on them, and so we could take account of any changes suggested by this committee. As you can see from the report, there were 32 KPIs last year. This year, we are proposing to have 35, so that's an increase of 3. We have increased the targets on 5, decreased the targets on 2, and there's 4 yet to be set because of a lack of data. I think you'll note in Appendix B that you made some very robust recommendations to us with regards to the targets. And I think we've tried to take account of all of those in Appendix B. So I think after that meeting, I think Mr. Sloper ran off and Steph ran off and tried to negotiate with all the service managers the increased targets. And we're pleased to say that most of those have been set, I think.
Thank you. I shall open it to the floor. Are there any comments? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Neil.
I just want to introduce you to Ben. So Ben Clifton Atfield, so he's our insight coordinator, works for Steph. So he's the one that actually does all the business of the performance indicators, chasing the officers, and actually he was in the vanguard of the negotiation with service managers. So I can't lay claim to that because Ben actually spoke with all the service managers following stuff up. So just to
so he did all the work. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Thank you.
It's always good to get officers to do dirty work, I find.
Okay. Welcome. Anyway, Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, very brief point, Chair. I think I'm very pleased that the comments that I think that I made about the one leisure targets got incorporated, and actually I think here is a case of scrutiny actually being shown to work in practice.
Thank you for that. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Definitely echo the comments that Councillor Jennings has just made, and thank you for coming back to us with these and listening to us and adjusting them as we discussed. We did have a robust conversation last time round, and it's good that we've been listened to, and it adds the value into the organisation, I feel, having those conversations. And just very briefly, Chair, obviously we just heard the discussion that we've just had then with Andy around green waste, and I think this is where, going back to the conversations Councillor Ferguson and I have always had, is how do we use the data and what the data is that's being presented to us. Some of the information that we've provided by Andy this evening would be quite useful in some of this information when we're looking at the mist bins. Well, comparing it to national bodies, we're still doing significantly better, even though we're still below our target, which is very, very ambitious. So I just hope going away over the next year that we can get a little bit more information, looking at other statistics from other organisations, but also looking at a distribution, as I say, Councillor Ferguson and I have discussed on many occasions, to try and work out where we sit locally, nationally. It gives us a better rounded picture when it comes to scrutinising and makes it a bit easier moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
I would agree. No, I agree actually with that sentiment you were going to say.
So yeah, it's been a difficult year with the report, and I think you noticed some of the quality went down. We lost the people who were previously such a good job of improving it over the last 3 years, and we're very lucky. And I think we had an unfortunate few months when Mr. Sloper was doing most of the work. Yeah, that's not why the quality was decreased, but it was a difficult few months. But I think having Ben and Steph on board, I've talked to them both about Councillor Martin's and I's desire to see standard deviations in the report, and I think they're very up. But as we have done previously for increasing the amount of relevant information that is in the report, so that might mean taking some information out. Of course, you don't want to have information bloat, but yeah, without wanting to speak for them, I think they're both very up for having even more detail in such a way that it improves performance.
They might regret that, but anyway, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. While I don't disagree with changing targets and tolerances, etc., I just want to make sure that members understand that behind these data are humans, and the human cost of increasing something to a point where it's unachievable and demoralising is something that we must consider as well. So just putting that on record.
I mean, I think this committee has always been cognizant of that, and we're trying to encourage people, we're trying to drive performance, we're trying to reward excellent performance, and we're also looking to see, as we've seen on a few occasions tonight, where we're not meeting that performance and changing it. So I think Ben did all the hard work we just said, but this is all done with the consent of the service owners. It's fair enough to push them to be better. Sometimes we don't. We never want to set unattainable targets, which is why 2 of the targets in this report have gone down, because we thought that they were unattainable, and there's little point in doing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. You know, we'll come to you for all the work in the future. Are there any other questions? Excellent. No more questions. So on that basis, I would like to close the meeting and thank everybody for their contributions and their patience tonight. It was a very long agenda. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.